Hey everyone, it's me, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm shaking writing this. I just wrapped up a midnight patrol deep in the big thicket, and what crackled through my scanner still echoes in my head. Tonight, I'm sharing 20 bone-chilling, true encounters from real Texas Park Rangers folks who clocked in expecting a routine shift, only to realize something was watching them from the shadows. I promise you. After hearing just one of these accounts, you'll never feel safe under a canopy of pines again. So if your stomach's already knotting up, do yourself a favor, hit subscribe now, because once you join Creepy Vibes, you won't want to miss a single whisper or shadow that crosses your path. Before we dive in, let me know, where are you watching from, and what time is it on your clock right now? Drop it in the comments and brace yourself, because these are the 20 Texas Park Rangers' terrifying encounters. I started the patrol at 11:30, the moon a sliver behind drifting clouds, and the hush of the big thicket settled so heavy around me it felt like breathing through wool. East Texas pines rose on either side of the gravel service road, Sentinel and Cathedral all at once timber, so old you have expected them to speak in tongues. I'd been on this route 100 times. Clockwork familiar. Check the water gauge at the old railroad culvert, swing past the ranger cabin, listen for gunshots on the scanner, then circle back before dawn. But that night, something had shifted. My boots crunched along the shoulder as I eased the truck into Park Loop, headlights cutting twin beams that pierced only a few yards. Humidity clung to my skin under the green uniform, and the scent of resin was so sharp I could taste it. The cab's radio sputtered an echo of static, just the usual winter humidity screwing with the wiring, so I flicked the scan knob. Silence, except for the hiss that crawled like insects in the speaker. I killed the engine. The world turned. Inert. No trucks roared by, no owls cried, no whip-poor wills called. Just the pines, their needles whispering secrets. And then I heard it, faint at first, my name, carried on a sigh through the trees, like a breeze but without breeze's courtesy. Coleman, so soft I thought the wind was learning to speak. I stood stock still, chest tight, breath stuck in my throat. Coleman, I swallowed, stared into the darkness ahead. The road curved into a stand of older trees, gnarled, not riddled. Beasts, and I felt the urge to back away. But I'd never quit a call. I flicked my flashlight on, the beam slicing a cone of clarity through the black. I swept it across the trunks. No movement, no shape, only ribbed bark and long shadows that flickered with the flash. My pulse pounded in my ears. Coleman, closer now, but still no wind in the needles. My heartbeat went analog, hammer against ribs. Who's there? I spoke into the dark, voice flat, rattling. The trees answered in silence. My radio crackled static, then nothing. I hit the mic button. Unit 4 to dispatch. Do you read me? Nothing. I flipped the mic off and clicked the flashlight to strobe. The trees convulsed with each flash. I thought I saw a shape slip between trunks, but my brain played tricks, backlit shadows dancing. I reminded myself, no loose bark could whisper a name. No branch could form the shape of a voice. But the voice had come from somewhere in that black choir. I started walking, slow, boots on gravel. Every step echoed. The strobe caught fallen pine cones, fractured the road into gleaming slices. My skin crawled, itch of goose flesh under the pivot collar. Up ahead, I saw the cabinet single window pitching yellow inside light. I shouldered past the door, planning to radio in from there, but the shaky beam revealed footprints in the dirt road. 2 narrow sets, boot tread deep, leading away from the cabin into the woods. I crouched to inspect them. Each sole-pressed name brand. Grooves into the soft earth, only they weren't mine. My footprints were farther back, trailing to the truck. These prints were fresh, smaller, almost deliberate. Each step pressed the dirt hard, sending pine needles skittering aside. And each print carried something I didn't want to acknowledge. They were my own size, but not my boots. I stood, stomach roiling. My flashlight trembled in my hand. "Who's messing with me?" I whispered. The forest bent in, leaned close. Pine needles rattled, though the night was dead calm. Then I heard it again right behind me, almost in my ear. "Coleman!" I spun. Light swirled. No one. But the footprints continued deeper. My training flew out the door. Curiosity, dread, my own name in the dark, so I followed. The beam tracked me through a tangle of underbrush, past broken roots, over a fallen log slick with moss. Each time I swallowed, the word hummed. Coleman. My. Radio yapped to life, a burst of static. I fumbled it. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I." The speaker exploded in a razored howl, then snapped silence. I cursed and shoved it away. Adrenaline flared. I pulled my flashlight higher, angled it down the trail. At the end, I saw a figure. I froze, heartstone. Against the dark stand of pines, just beyond the strobe's reach, a silhouette. Broad shoulders, a ranger hat, boots planted. I should have called out, but my voice nodded. That silhouette uncapped slowly, tipped back, and I saw the hat badge glint, the Texas Parks and Wildlife star I wore. It felt like looking in a broken mirror. Then it lifted one hand and beckoned. Finger twitching. "Coleman?" It sounded giddy, deeply amused. I took a step. The figure dipped its head. As I advanced, the strobe went full dark, my flashlight flickered out. I lunged for the beam switch, nothing but darkness and the stink of pine turpentine drowning me. Cold sweat slid down my spine. I flicked the beam back at the figure. It dissolved into the woods, falling like mist between the trees. My feet scrambled for purchase on the pine needles. In that same moment, the earth under the figure cracked open with a low moan, a gap splitting the soil as if the land itself was tearing. I stumbled backward and heard my own footfall. 2, 3, 4. I glanced down. In the strobe's edge, I saw more footprints, mine plunging toward the fissure. And rising from that chasm was a raspy chorus, dozens of voices, all whispering my name. Coleman. 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 The crack widened, revealing darkness so black it drank the strobe. I wanted to move, to run, but my boots felt rooted. I stared, heart hammering, as dozens of pale hands clawed their way up from blackness, ungainly, skeletal. The whispering became a hiss, rising to a shriek. My radio antenna snapped, the scanner spit static like angry flames. I hurled myself backward, tripped, fell into brambles. Pain flared in my shoulder-prickling nettles. I hit the ground, scrambled. Onto all fours, spit dirt. I didn't look back. My lungs burned as I tore through underbrush, guided only by a sliver of moon and the pounding in my ears that matched my sprint. After what felt like hours, I burst onto the service road. The truck's headlights stared back at me, windshield cracked as though struck by a rock. I yanked open the door and tumbled inside, slamming it shut. The engine turned over, stuttering, and I floored the gas. Gravel kicked up in my mirrors as I roared away. Behind me, the whispers chased in my mind, a staccato mantra of my own name. I didn't stop until the sun burned the horizon pink. By then, the forest was silent, the pines restful in morning light. But I can still hear it when the wind dies, and I can still see those hands, sliding into darkness, beckoning with my own star. They say you never forget your first close call with something you can't explain. I haven't, and on every patrol, since, I keep my radio on, flashlight charged, my name on my mind, because I know, deep in the pines something learned it, and it waits. Always whispering my name back. He woke up to silence heavier than any storm he'd ever heard. Sam Crenshaw's eyelids fluttered open against the dim glow of dawn creeping through the slats of the rickety blinds, and for a moment he lay still, listening. The radio had gone. Dead sometime in the night, the hum of its standby power a distant memory, and the only sound left was the damp hush pressing in from the windows. He rubbed his face, the back of his hand damp with sweat or maybe rain, he wasn't sure. Sometimes in his sleep he dreamed of the woods, but this felt different, like the forest had come alive and crept right up to his cabin door. He swung his legs over the side of the cot and stood, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. The air in the cabin was cold, not the crisp chill of a Texas morning, but a bone-freezing bite that seeped through his shirt. He should have been used to the cold out here. Fog does strange things to temperature, but this was something more something. Wrong. He laced his boots in the dim light and reached for his flashlight and keys. He strapped the old .357 revolver to his hip out of habit, though he'd only fired it once in the line of duty, a feral hog too big to handle any other way. It was comforting, heavy against his side. Outside, the fog lay thick across the courtyard, swirling so dense it blurred the edges of the log walls. He could barely see the edge of the porch. The breath in his lungs came out in clouds, and he shivered as he stepped off the porch into the silent world. The gravel crunched underfoot, and for a moment he thought he heard voices. A tremor of whispering carried on the damp air. He paused and shone the flashlight along the path to the lake, but the beam sank into a wall of haze that looked as solid as a brick wall. Oak and pine loomed around him, their trunks ghostly white outlines wrapped by the fog dot. Every morning he checked the shoreline, made sure no one had capsized, no one had wandered into the water thinking it was shallower than it seemed. Today the lake was invisible, hidden beneath the mist. He took a step forward, then another, listening. His footprints never marked the ground. The gravel, pine needles, and fallen leaves sprang back into place behind him as though nothing had disturbed them. He stopped midway down the path, shone his light behind him. Nothing. No footprints. No marks. He took another step, then looked back again. Still nothing. He blinked and wondered if it was his mind playing tricks. As he neared the boathouse, the old, battered shack where teenagers carved names into the rotted planks, the crunch of his boots slowed and died away. He realized he couldn't hear the wood under his feet at all, just the soft, insistent whisper of the fog pressing in. He raised his hand to his mouth and whistled a short, sharp call. The sound swallowed itself within the mist within an instant. He pressed the flashlight against the wood of the boathouse. No crooks of shadow or flicker of movement, just stale air and scented rot. Leaves clung to the sills, wet and dark, and the broken windows stared back like empty eye sockets. Sam forced the door open, its hinges screaming in protest. Inside, the floor was littered with broken oars and old life jackets. He swept the light from corner to corner. Nothing moved, not even the rats that usually scurried at dawn. He stepped in, his heel cracking a broken plank, and the noise echoed twice before it was absorbed by the fog outside. He heard water then, a murmur growing louder, like slow waves washing against the support beams. He moved to the open side of the boathouse and looked out. Now he could see the lake, ghostly silver beneath the veil. He took a deep breath and shone the beam at the waterline. Something rippled, just a faint swell, but it was enough. And then he saw them, footprints pressed into the mud and wet sand, leading out of the lake onto the dock. They were shallow, human prints, perfectly spaced, no boot treads, bare feet. They were small, delicate, feminine. The water had lapped just high enough to cover them, then receded, leaving them glistening in the flashlight beam. Sam swallowed. He stepped closer, heart pounding so hard his teeth rattled. The prints led up onto the dock planks, spaced evenly, one after another, towards him. He leaned in, his breath catching. The air inside the boathouse had turned frigid, and his breath misted white. Marks where the planks buckled from weight. Marks where the nails had been torn. And beyond those, leading off the dock and into the woods, the prints continued, as though someone had walked right out of the lake, past the boathouse and into the pines. Against every instinct screaming at him to run, he stepped onto the dock. The fog pressed in from the sides, spilling across the boards, thick as cream. There was no sign of a body, no glint of clothing, only the footprints. He followed them, each step tentative, his boot overlapping the bare print. Each time he stepped down, the print vanished behind him, erased. He had to lean over to see where the next one was. Then his light flickered. The battery was dying. He cursed softly and patted his jacket for a spare. He didn't find the spare. When he patted the left pocket, it came away wet. His fingertips brushed something slick, skin, a scrap of fabric. His pistol was gone. He spun around, heart in his throat. The boathouse door was closed now, the hinges silent. He stared at it, no footprints leading back, nothing in the fog. No sign he'd ever been there. The prints kept going into the trees. He remembered every rule he'd ever learned: how to track a deer, how to follow broken brush to a wayward cow, how to find a lost hiker. But here, the scene defied every rule. No sound except his ragged breathing and the whisper of fog. No prints behind him. Nothing but white haze and the wet path ahead. Then, a sound. A soft thud, like someone collapsing onto a bed of pine needles. He snapped his flashlight up and peered into the gloom. He thought he saw a shape, hunched and pale, crawling. He lifted his voice and called out, "Hey!" The shape halted, and he felt its eyes on him, invisible behind the fog. Then it dropped into shadow, and something in the mist stirred like breath. He couldn't move. He felt frozen from the waist down. Something tapped his shoulder, light but insistent. He whipped around but saw nothing. The fog seemed to pulse, drawing itself tight around him. He summoned his strength and ran, stumbling and tearing through branches. The air grew warmer with every step, the fog thinning. He heard laughter behind him, soft and distant, like a child. Giggling, his boots scrunched gravel again. He emerged onto the trail, heart hammering. The trees parted and he saw the cabin porch ahead, its lights off, dark and unwelcoming. He sprinted forward, slammed the door shut behind him, and pressed his back against it, gasping. Inside, the cabin was silent. He reached for the light switch, but the bulb had blown. He fumbled for a match, struck it, and lit an oil lamp. The flame wavered, casting jittery shadows. He sat in the single rattan chair, knees up, flashlight on the floor, gun still missing. His boots lay where he'd kicked them off. He stared at the windows, waiting, but the fog had receded. Through the pane, he saw only gray sky and black outlines of pines. He never found his gun. He never found footprints leading away from the boathouse either. He never explained the wet scrap of fabric in his pocket. When the sun rose fully and burned the fog off Lost Lake, the world looked normal again. The water glistened, birds called. From their nests and on the dock, everything was dry. But Sam Crenshaw knew the truth. Those mornings, when the mist spilled off the water in a wall of living fog, something walked out of the lake. Something that wore no boots, left no trace behind, and vanished into the woods as easily as breath on glass. And every dawn, when the calls came in about missing hikers or campers, he listened for footsteps. But all he heard was the soft, raspy whisper of the fog. He stayed on the phone patching through calls for a week after. Then he handed in his resignation. He left Lost Lake behind, swearing he'd never set foot here again. He couldn't explain what he'd seen, but he knew it was real. and as long as the fog rose off the water at dawn, it would wait for its next footprints to be pressed into the wet earth, waiting for the light to fade and the mist to roll back in. Cole Hammond tightened the straps of his pack as the late afternoon sun slanted across the Davis Mountains, turning the scrub pines to molten bronze. Patrol 47 had been peaceful until yesterday when he stumbled across that first fragment of bone, half a femur, bleached and clean, jutting from the dusty trail. He knelt beside it, hard hammering, and brushed away loose dirt to reveal shallow engravings. His badge number, 5821, raw and precise against ivory. He shivered, half expecting the desert wind to whisper his name, but only the crickets answered. He snapped photos, marked the GPS coordinates, and without a second glance, moved on, eager for daylight to fade and turn the mountains back into the familiar hush he knew so well. This morning brought another fragment, this one a jagged piece of rib half buried beneath chaparral and scrub oak. Hammond found it at mile marker 3.8, deeper into the wilderness than any bona fide visitor should tread without a map or a permit. The engraving was fresh, the groove still sharp. His number. He pressed a finger into the groove, feeling the cool hardness beneath his skin, remembering the weight of his silver badge. He called dispatch, but the voice on the other end was detached, too busy scheduling shifts and reporting weather. "Keep a log," they said. "Let us know if anything else turns up." Easy for them to say from behind their desks, where bones don't whisper and shadow shapes don't follow Dot by late afternoon. Fatigue had weighed down Hammond's senses like water against his chest. The mountains were restless, the wind rattling the canyon walls in odd rhythms that sounded almost like breathing. He slogged up the slope toward his cabin, his one concession to civilization, only to find a third piece laid across the threshold. A sharpened vertebra, impossibly white, balanced on his doorstep as if placed there with deliberate care. His footsteps faltered. Every ranger before him had spoken of this place as holy ground, silent and unmarred. Yet here were the remains of something unholy. He snatched it up, heart thundering, peered around. The woods stared back, implacable and still. He retreated inside and barred the door, but sleep remained stubbornly out of reach. That night, sleep slipped away entirely, replaced by dreams of crawling shapes and hands slick with bone dust. He pictured the fragments on his trail forming some grotesque message, a map that led only to terror. When dawn cracked the sky open, he strapped on his gear again, moving like a man in a trance, compelled to see the trail's end. Dispatch tried to talk him out of it, but he hung up without a word. There was a mission now, a deeper purpose. He could not deny. He followed the forgotten animal trails cut by mountain lions in Javelina, paths he'd blocked from his memory for years. Each step brought another bone, a weathered skull perched on a rock ledge, its empty eye sockets hollow like the void itself. A jawbone lying in a murky pool, the teeth chipped and uneven as if bitten down by something unseen. Every fragment bore the same etching, 5821. He wondered if his mind was fraying, if exhaustion had carved that number into every stray bone he saw. But the knives of daylight sliced away that suspicion. He knew what he saw. By mid-afternoon, the sky darkened with rain clouds, threatening a storm Hammond dared not evade. He rounded a bend in the trail and froze. Ahead lay a natural limestone alcove set into the mountainside, its mouth yawning like a cave. Stalactites gleamed in the half-light, and the air inside smelled of earth and old rot. Bones littered the floor, wrists, phalanges, clavicles, so many fragments they looked like an altar. At the center stood a crudely fashioned stanchion of antlers, upon which hung a complete human femur, polished smooth. Under his breath, Hammond choked, recognizing the number burned onto its surface. His number, etched deeper than memory, as though carved by a knife dipped in grief. He swallowed bile and stumbled closer, compelled by dread and fascination. Lightning flashed beyond the cave's opening, illuminating a figure crouched in the gloom, a shape that looked, for a heartbeat, like himself. The ranger's breath caught. As the figure stood, shoulders slumped, head hung low beneath a brimmed hat identical to his own. In the dull thunderlight, Hammond saw only the silhouette and a long line of shimmering bone shards at the stranger's feet, each one etched with his number, each one fresh, each one identical. Before he could react, the figure lifted a hand. In its palm lay a fragment, a tiny piece of cranium whose surface curved perfectly to fit Hammond's grip. The ranger's fingers clenched around it, and in that instant he felt a surge of heat, of pulse, as if the fragment were still part of a living thing. A low whisper drifted from the cave walls, so faint he could barely catch the words, "Come home." It wasn't a voice. It was memory, buried in his blood, calling him back to a place he didn't want to remember. His legs gave out. He collapsed onto the bone-strewn floor, eyes locked on the silhouette that advanced toward him in silent inevitability. Pain bloomed behind his eyes, and then nothing but white light. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on the trail outside the cave, dawn light washing over him. The storm had passed, leaving the mountains slick and gleaming. He sat up, heart pounding, and felt something heavy in his coat pocket. He drew out the fragment from the cave, his own skull's piece, and stared at the shallow grooves. 5,821. As the sun broke fully above the ridge, he realized that every fragment on the trail, every rib and vertebra, every bone etched with his number, belonged to him. And deep in his mind, a new carving was forming, one he couldn't erase, the knowledge that this trail was not leading him toward the living world, but deeper into himself, into the bones of a ranger who had died long ago, but could not find rest. I never believed in ghosts, never truly, until the night I drove down County Road 214 toward Camp Navarro. The moon that night was thin as a sliver of bone, slicing pale light through the feathery pines that leaned over the cracked asphalt. The old sign, its paint long peeled to dust, creaked on a single rusted hinge. Camp Navarro Youth Retreat. I pulled in, the engine sputtering as if it felt the weight of something watching me, and I stepped onto gravel that crunched like dry bones beneath my boots. They said the place shut down in 1978, after 3 campers vanished and 1 counselor hanged himself from the climbing tower. They say the state police never found the bodies, never explained the chalk-white handprints smeared across the bunks. Stories swirl that at night you can hear laughter by the lake, but it's hollow like the sound of ice cracking under thin water. I came with a tape recorder and a handheld radio, half to prove there was nothing here, half because I couldn't resist a dare. I set up near the mess hall first. The building sagged in on itself, windows black-eyed with grime. I switched. On the portable radio, scanning for any stray frequency. Static hissed, and for a moment I thought I heard a child's voice whisper, "Help me." But the wind was cold and restless, and I shook my head, chalking it up to imagination. I laid my recorder on a rickety folding table and walked toward Cabin 5, where the first girl disappeared. The door hung open like an empty eye socket. Inside, twin beds lay stripped to bare frames, mattresses gone. Graffiti scarred the walls, 4 names crudely scratched: Jemima, Tommy, Lucas, Emily. Beneath them another mark, an X, bleeding red rust. That's when the radio came alive. At first it was just a burst of static, a flurry of crackles, like distant rain on tin. Then a boy's voice, brittle as dried leaves, drifting through the speaker, "Please, don't leave us." I pressed the radio to my ear. "Who's there?" I said, my voice tight. The whisper came again. It's so cold. I stepped back, heart slamming. The forest seemed to hush, as if holding its breath. I pointed the radio toward the cabin. "What do you want?" The voice rattled. "We're buried." The transmission crashed to a low moan, then silence. My blood turned to ice. I fumbled for the recorder again, but when I looked up, the cabin was empty. No movement, no breath of wind, just the heavy stillness of rot. I left cabin 5 trembling and walked toward the lake, where the rumor said campers heard voices on old walkie-talkies. The path was overgrown, brambles snagging at my jeans. Moonlight dappled the water, silver scars on glass. I found an old radio, half buried in mud, its antenna snapped. I picked it up, wiped the grime, and flicked the switch. Nothing. Then, a pop and a girl's voice trembling. "They're under us." My teeth chattered. "Under what?" I whispered. The voice sobbed. "The ground. We can't come up." I dropped the radio, its batteries scattering like black pebbles. I stared at the shore. A ripple moved in the water, though no breeze stirred. And then I saw them, shapes just beneath the surface, pale and unmoving, arms outstretched as if begging. I dipped a fingertip into the cool water. It pulsed, urgent, and for a heartbeat their limbs jerked, and a chorus of faint wails rose from the lake. I staggered back, lungs burning, stumbled over roots, nearly struck the trunk of an oak. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might tear through my ribs. I forced myself to the shoreline, gasping. The shapes retreated, vanishing into deeper shadows. I stepped into the water to find footprints, nothing but mud. Yet I felt eyes on me, deep in the forest. I turned toward the campgrounds. Cabins clustered like broken teeth around an empty courtyard. Lanterns and picnic tables littered the ground, rusted cans, splintered benches. And there, in the middle of the circle, the climbing tower loomed, a skeletal frame reaching skyward. The ladder's rungs were rotted, but someone had tied a length of rope to the top. A noose swung just out of reach. I approached it slowly, breath-catching. The rope twisted lightly, though there was no breeze. My boots crunched on debris. I raised my flashlight. The beam landed on the noose. It glinted white. There was a figure beneath it, a girl, 9 or 10, dress soaked through, with mud and water, hair plastered to her face. Her back was to me, shoulders hunched. I called out, voice cracking. "Hey!" She didn't move. I took another step. "Are you okay?" The spotlight of my torch wavered as I shined it on her. Then she lurched upright, swinging gently, feet brushing the ground. The noose slackened. I froze. Her head lolled to the side. Hair shifted like wet weeds. She whispered in a voice that was both child and something else. "You shouldn't be here." I stumbled backward. I'm sorry." I fumbled for the radio again, desperation clawing at me. I keyed the mic. "This is Ranger Holt, King County. I need evac." The reply was immediate, but not from the dispatcher. "They won't let you leave." The voice was a chorus of children, overlapping, their tones jagged, pleading. "Stay with us." My flashlight flickered and died. Panic roared. I fumbled for batteries, clipped them in, and the light sputtered back. The girl was gone, and behind the tower, the ground had cracked open in a fissure. Black and yawning dot, I backed away, heart hammering. The fissure shivered, and from its depths crawled pale limbs, tiny arms gripping jagged rock. A dozen shapes emerged, like drowned dolls, eyes empty sockets. They rose, dragging their torsos free, bodies coated in mud and lichen, faces split. With silent screams, they advanced in a circle, hands reaching as if to pull me in. I reloaded the radio, voice trembling. "Truck, give me a location." Static swallowed the words. The circle tightened. My skin crawled. Fear pooled low in my belly. I turned and fled, branches whipping my face as I sprinted toward my rig. Behind me, the children's moans followed, echoing off broken cabins and the drowning lake. I slammed into the passenger door, ripped it open, and dove in. My radio fell to the floor. I hit the starter. The engine roared, backfiring. My hand shook so hard I could barely shift into drive. The windshield was streaked with mud and ghostly handprints. I pressed the accelerator, tires spinning on gravel, and finally lurched forward. The headlights lit the tree line, and for a moment, I thought I saw dozens of pale faces staring back. Then they were gone. I didn't stop until I hit Highway 59. I called dispatch from my phone no bars. I reached County HQ by CB on Channel 1. "This is Holt. I'm coming in." They answered, calm. I told them where I'd been. They listened, then told me Camp Navarro had been bulldozed 15 years ago. Every structure removed, foundations filled. The lake was drained, the ground rebuilt to flat pasture. They said it was impossible I'd seen anything that night. But I have the tape still, and when I play it, I hear those voices begging, "Help us, Holt." And sometimes at home, late at night, I swear I hear the crackle of a radio. Desperate pleas from decades ago, carried on the wind through rotting pine, calling me back. I keep telling myself it's my mind playing tricks, but I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. And I know they're still there, waiting. The air was unnaturally still as I stepped onto the broken path leading to Devil's Bridge, and the world seemed to hold its breath beneath the blood-red moon. The stones beneath my boots were slick with moss and something older, darker, some residue that whispered of decay and dread. I had driven across the county in silence, the radio dead and the tires groaning on the gravel side road, drawn by the stories that clung to that old span like cobwebs. Tales of travelers who vanished, of lights flickering beneath the arches, where no river ran anymore, of half-formed shapes pacing in the darkness like beasts, half awake in their own nightmares. Now I was here, hard hammering, hands cold on the flashlight I hadn't turned on, letting the lunar glow be my guide into a place that felt as though it had been waiting for me all my life. The collapsed stones of the bridge lay strewn across. The dry creek bed, jagged silhouettes under the scarlet sky, as if something monumental had snapped and fallen, leaving behind an abyss eager to swallow the unwary. The air smelled of earth turned over after a storm, of damp leaves and rotting wood. But there was something else, to an iron tang like blood on old metal, and I swallowed hard, tasting copper in my throat. A low, rasping breath drifted across the ruin, and I froze, convinced it had been mine, until the wind shifted and carried a scuff of movement from the shadows. I raised the beam of the flashlight, its circle of pale white light trembling as it swept over the stones, revealing nothing, only more blackness, but the feeling of eyes upon me grew, crawling along my spine. Then the shapes emerged, those twisted wraiths, pacing back and forth beneath the arch where the stones had once met. They were neither solid nor transparent, but something in between, like smoke given form, their edges smoking and fraying against the night. They moved with a jerky, disjointed rhythm, as if learning how to walk by trial and error, their limbs bending at grotesque angles. Their heads, or what passed for heads, twisted toward me, and though they had no faces, I heard a chorus of whispers rising in a strange resonance, hundreds of voices layered upon one another, each a plea or a scream or a laugh that grated at my mind like fingernails on slate. I took a step backward, and my boot struck a stone that wobbled, sending pebbles scattering. The shapes paused as if listening, and I realized then that the bridge itself groaned, some ancient structure, waking from a slumber too black even for the moon to touch. The ground beneath the arch hummed, vibrating through my solace, and I saw cracks spreading across the stones like veins of some living creature. For a moment, Time stood still, just me. The red sky, the collapsing stones, and those lost things that yearned to walk free once more. Then a whisper rose above the rest, a single voice that lingered as the others fell away. Stay, stay. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea, a longing so deep it threatened to crack my heart. I knew I should run, should sprint, back to my car and never look back, but something held me there, transfixed by the sight of those half-formed shapes, as if they beckoned me to join their endless vigil. My breath fogged in the chill night, and I realized I was shaking uncontrollably. I heard the radio static again, soft at first, then growing louder, crackling with urgency, though I hadn't turned it on. It flared to life, spitting out fragments of children's laughter, of distant footsteps, of sobs swallowed by silence. The moonlight shifted, revealing details I hadn't seen before, hands that were too long, fingers tapering into points. Torsos, stretched like old leather. Eyes that pulsed with a sickly yellow glow. Each shape was unique, a patchwork of corpses long buried and dreams long forgotten. A sudden gust of wind rattled the loose stones, sending one of the figures stumbling, its limbs knotting like broken wires, and it collapsed in a heap that seethed with movement. I watched horrified as its body writhed as if the remnants of everything it had been were trying to crawl out, desperate for release. The whisper came again, louder this time, pounding in my skull. Join us. My flashlight flickered, and in that heartbeat of darkness, I felt fingers brush against my arm, cold, wet, insistent. I screamed, fumbled for the beam, and as the light snapped back, the shapes recoiled, their whispering cacophony swelling into a wail that tore through the night like a scythe. The ground shook, the stones groaned, and I ran, heedless of the razor shards of rock that cut into my hands and knees, heedless of the voices urging me back, promising the solace of oblivion. Behind me, the bridge shuddered and stones cascaded into the dry creek bed with thunderous clatters, dust rising, like specters in the crimson glow. I didn't stop until I was back in my truck, slamming the door, heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. The engine roared to life, and as I tore down the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those jagged silhouettes at the broken archway waiting for me. But the road behind me was empty, all traces of the bridge swallowed by night and distance. Yet when I looked at the dashboard, smeared across the windshield in droplets dark as ink, I saw a single handprint, long spindly fingers pressing from the other side, and I knew they had followed me home. It was supposed to be a quiet night at the Cedar Ridge Lookout Tower. Jasper had volunteered for the graveyard shift, alone with the pines and the hum of the generator that kept the camera network alive. Up here, 40 feet above the forest floor, the world was a carpet of ink, the trees swaying like black fingertips against a moonless sky. He poured himself another cup of stale coffee, its bitterness crawling down his throat, and tapped his gloves against the metal railing, listening to the patter of rain beginning on the corrugated roof. The tower camera, mounted on a swiveling arm, caught every inch of the ladder, every bolt in the structure, and with infrared vision, tracked any living heat signature. Jasper checked the monitor. Nothing. It was just him and the rain and the woods creaks echoing through the tower's bones. He rubbed his eyes. The paperwork for the fire permits could wait. Nothing ignited in this damp, cold night. He should have been asleep hours ago, but the night shift had that effect, made you crawl into a stretched-out, jittery rhythm, every nerve ending exposed at precisely midnight. The generator faltered, the monitor blinking off, then right back on. Jasper frowned. A glitch. When the camera feed returned, he half expected hope to see the dark forest again, but instead, the ladder gleamed in ghost-white infrared. Something was there. He leaned in, heart pitching. A figure, hunched against the ladder, as if pausing between rungs. No sound but the rain. He tapped the screen, clicked to zoom, and saw it. The outline of a man tall, impossibly thin, arms wrapped around the rails, head tipped back like someone gasping for breath. But no breath could be seen. The space around it was darker than the rest of the forest, as if the night recoiled from its presence. Jasper stood, his boots echoing on the metal floor. He peered through the window at the ladder's foot where nothing moved. No one grounded in the mud, no footprints. Everything was still. He reached for the radio to call the ranger station, but a chill slid down his spine and his voice snagged in his throat. Instead, he hit the intercom, but heard only the static hiss. The tower's wires must be soaked. He twisted the channel knob, begging for a signal, but got only that hollow crackle. He debated going down. Storm or no storm, this wasn't protocol, no. Solo climbs in the dark. Yet the monitor insisted something was climbing. His boots carried him to the door, rain soaking through the tarpaulin jacket. Electricity arced in his mind, fear and duty sparring. He grabbed the flashlight from the rack, its beam cutting a pale cone through the gloom as he descended. Each rung of the ladder was slick with rain. His gloves slid on the metal. The forest's wet breath hissed on his neck. He told himself it was a prank, some kid trespassing, maybe wearing a heat-soaked coat. A trespasser would laugh when caught, would run. But he found no footprints, only the prints he'd left going down. He crouched at the ladder's base, stared back up. The rail had faint handprint smudges of moisture that no one should have left. They ended halfway. Then nothing. He climbed again. Midway up, a soft scrape echoed as if someone's boot had ground against the metal a breath away. Someone was there. He froze, knuckles white around a rung. Hard hammering, he swept the flashlight beam upward. Nothing. The rain pelted the wood. He chalked it up to nerves, the wind snatching at his jacket. He climbed the last few feet, hauled himself into the tower platform, and stood dripping in the pale glow of the emergency lamp. The monitor blinked, and the figure was there again, now on the platform, just beyond the camera's range, too close. He peered at the screen. The figure's head turned slowly, and he saw a shape but no face, just a hollow darkness where features should have been. It pressed a hand against what should have been the wooden planks of the tower's wall. The hand glowed faintly. Elongated fingers curved like talons. Jasper's breath caught in his chest. He spun around, shining his flashlight into the corner of the platform, but the beam revealed only the damp boards and the thrum of the generator. The air crackled. Then came a soft sigh, like the exhale of someone relieved or resigned. Something scraped against the planks behind him. He swung the light around, caught a glimpse of an eye, chalky white, blinking once before vanishing around the corner of the supply closet. He swallowed, conscious of each rapid heartbeat. The tower's walls felt too thin. He backed toward the door, his boots slick on the metal floor, and turned the handle. It wouldn't budge. Pinned from the outside, he slammed his shoulder against it, the flashlight skittering across the floor with a metallic clang. Rain hammered overhead. On the monitor, the figure edged closer to the camera, fingers curling around its edge. Its head tilted, as if curious or amused by him. The darkness, where its face should have been pooled and shimmered. Jasper lunged for the radio one more time, nothing. Then a soft clicking noise, like the camera swivel unlocking on its own. The camera twisted toward him. He sidestepped, heart in his throat, and watched on the screen as the camera's field. A view turned away to the forest. Perhaps its wiring was ground loose by the wet. He exhaled. Relief washed over him until he heard the scrape of heavy boots on the ladder. He sprinted to the corner, yanked open the storage door, and ducked inside. He pressed against the wooden wall, flashlight against his chest, shining through the crack. Footsteps climbed, slow, deliberate. The ladder's rungs bent under weight. He held his breath as the footsteps reached the tower platform above. The footsteps paused, and he heard the thunk of boots on metal. A shape passed across it, faint light filtering through the vent slats above the closet. Then a sound like a breath close to his ear. A low, guttural whisper that tickled the back of his skull. "Watcher," it trailed off. His skin prickled, every hair on his arms lifting. He dared not move. The whisper came again, closer, but no voice, just that rasp, as if wind slithered. Through a shell, something pressed the closet door light seeping through the gap. The latch creaked. Jasper's mind spun. Logic told him, open it and face danger, stay hidden and be trapped. He swallowed, thought of the radio tower flashing outside, the highway patrol beyond the trees. He yanked the door open and bolted toward the ladder, grabbing the lowest rung and climbing with reckless haste. He emerged onto the platform, chest heaving, rain spraying off his jacket. The figure stood at the top of the ladder, but this time he could see it clearly. A man-shaped silhouette with ribs showing under a taut, grayed skin, eyes like hollow coals, mouth split into a grin that menaced even in the infrared. It raised its head, and the grin opened impossibly wide, a darkness swallowing light itself. Jasper leapt to the camera mount and shattered it with a punch, sending sparks onto the floor. The figure stared at him, then tilted its head, raised a crooked finger, and signaled him to come closer. Fear seared through Jasper, yet some primal curiosity rooted him in place. The thing dropped from the ladder and landed on the platform without a sound, inches from Jasper's ankle. His flashlight beam danced across its form, distorted, inhuman, limbs too long, joints bending wrong. Its grin stretched further, pulling the corners of its face back, exposing teeth black with rot, each one sharpened to a wicked point. It whispered again, low enough for only Jasper to hear, "I watch, and you watch together." The platform beneath them groaned. Jasper took a step backward. The thing mirrored him, matching his every movement. He raised his flashlight, swung it toward the stairs, and bolted down, heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. The ladder swung beneath him as he descended. The thing followed with unnatural leaps, gliding rather than climbing. He hit the ground, skidded on the mud, and turned to see it drop into the darkness, then reappear at the ladder's base, arms outstretched as if beckoning. Rain washed his face, and for a moment, lightning split the sky, illuminating a face streaked with despair. The thing pressed its palms together and tilted forward, beckoning. He turned and ran without looking back, sprinting through the pines, branches whipping at his jacket. He heard something heavy crashing after him, branches snapping under a weight that should not have been there. He plunged into the dark road, headlights of a passing truck cutting through the storm. He flagged it down, voice cracking, begging the driver to call the station. The driver's fogged-up windows revealed only darkness. Jasper clutched at the door, trembling. He glanced back. 2 glowing points hovered at the tree line. For a heartbeat, he thought they were the truck's headlights, and then realized they were eyes staring, unblinking. The taillights of the truck shone red, then the engine revved, and the driver peeled away into the night. Jasper collapsed to his knees, rain soaking him. Hearing the faint echo of a laugh that felt like glass shattering inside his chest. In the weeks that followed, the Cedar Ridge camera was found smashed beyond repair. The tower closed for repairs. Jasper never went back. But sometimes, late at night when the wind blows through the pines, he hears it. A soft rasp carried on the breeze. Watcher, watcher. And he knows someone or something still climbs that ladder when the world is asleep. The wind off the canyon was a knife against Tom Andrews' neck as he rounded the last outcrop, headlamp beam cutting a narrow path through the thick Texas night. He'd done this stretch of the Caprock Escarpment a dozen times, once on horseback, twice on foot patrol, but tonight was different. A tip had come in. Ranch hands swore they'd seen people scaling that sheer rock face under the moonlight, like spiders clinging to stone. That alone was odd. The cliff was near vertical, punctuated only by narrow cracks no sane climber would trust at night. But the ridge was silent now, slick with dew, and Tom's own breath sounded loud in his ears. He paused, scanning the expanse. Below, the lights of the small town of Queetack flickered in the distance, pinned against a low horizon. Somewhere beyond lay the Brazos River, its slow curve hidden by darkness. He turned his beam back to the cliff where earlier he'd spotted something, a faint glimmer like a reflection off Metal Gear. At first his mind wrote it off, a reflector from a lost hiker's pack, maybe a piece of trash. But as he raised his binoculars, two tiny flickers of movement danced on the rock wall, no more than white pinpricks in the black. He drew a breath, pressed his eye to the lens, and saw them clearly. Two figures, suspending themselves on ropes, inching upward like monks in some grim pilgrimage. Tom's pulse quickened. He clicked his radio mic. "Dispatch, this is Anders. Got eyes on two. Climbers at grid 073. They're halfway up that escarpment over." Static spat back. "Copy, Anders. HQ checking. Identify subject. Over." He swallowed. "Looks like two adults, maybe two women? Climbing in full gear harnesses, carabiners. No headlamps that I can see. Just those reflective strips. Feet on the cliff and no footprints down here. Nothing." Silence answered, and he scanned the ground at his boots. The moon broke through clouds, and he saw it. Not a single fresh indent in the soft, loamy earth. No tracks in the dust-coated rocks where cattle trod, no marks on the hardpan. He ran a hand through the soil and flicked it off. Pristine. He shook his head, disbelief prickling his skin. He radioed again and began to climb toward the base of the cliff, gripping iron-studded sandstone with cautious steps. The cold seeped through his jacket, the night thick with cicada calls rising in a low hum. Every so often, a loose stone clattered down from the heights above, rattling behind him. He halted, headlamp fixed upward. Two shapes moved slowly upward, their arms and legs finding purchase in cracks invisible to the unpracticed eye. He opened his mouth to shout, but his voice died in his throat as they paused, frozen, as if sensing his presence. Their heads of heads they had tilted in unison, as though peering down at him. Even from this distance, he could make out nothing but pale outlines. Their features were hidden, swallowed by darkness and shadow. His radio crackled. "Anders, be advised your call sign's gone dead up there. Can you confirm you're all right? Over." He nodded to himself, pressed the PTT. His voice was low. "I'm fine, but they stopped. I'll try to get a closer look." Every instinct screamed caution, but curiosity propelled him forward. He edged along a narrow ledge that curved around the base, shining his light on rock fissures that could hide a swarm of scorpions. He crouched behind a jutting boulder and peered up. The two figures had climbed 20 feet higher. One paused, raised an arm, and traced a gesture against the Fia. Rock slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. The second simply watched, swaying slightly as if rocked by an unseen breeze. Tom's heart pounded. He steadied the binoculars again, and in the fleeting wash of moonlight he saw something impossible. On their bare wrists, tattoos of names. He recognized from old missing person posters pinned to Sheriff Blake's corkboard. Maggie Whitaker, lost in '98. Levi Hargrove, missing since '05. Both were never found, presumed dead or vanished into the scrub. He blinked, and the tattoos glowed faintly, like bioluminescent ink. His stomach lurched. He swallowed thickly and dropped the binoculars. Jesus Christ, he whispered that he dared not call it in, not yet. If these were ghosts, if this was something else, he didn't want the cavalry spooking them. He needed proof. He switched his headlamp to infrared and trained it on the rock. The figures shimmered, borderline translucent. He held his breath. The first leaped upward, arms flexing unnaturally, feet absorbing the blow like a cat springs to its paws. Then both vanished, one over the lip of the escarpment, the second into a deep crevice that twisted out of sight. Tom staggered back, slammed his hand on the rock for support. There was no noise, no meaty thud, nothing but the echoing chirp of crickets. He swept his light across the ground. Still no footprints. No scratch marks where pitons were pounded. It was as if they had emerged from the stone itself. A cold dread settled over him. He radioed, voice shaky. They're gone. I don't think they climbed down. No tracks. I'm heading back to HQ. Over. But his radio crackled only static. He clicked on the emergency band. Silence. He tapped the side of the transceiver. The battery was full. His skin prickled. He looked over his shoulder. The ridge behind him was empty save for his own echoing footsteps. The moon dipped behind a cloud and darkness pooled at his feet. He turned forward again. The rock face loomed, like a gaping maw. He shook his head, tried to resume walking, but his boots met a patch of clay. He brushed it and stared. A single boot, print size 10, his size impressed in the soft mud leading toward the cliff. He raised his lamp and saw more. A trail of them, perfectly spaced, winding up to the crevice where the second figure had disappeared. His breath caught. He reached out, pressed a finger into the clay. It sank in deeper than it should. He lifted. Blood trickled off his fingertip. He tasted copper in his mouth. The hair on his arm stood on end. He wanted to flee, but found himself stepping forward, drawn by the prints. They led to a recess in the rock, where the canyon wall curved inward, like a cradle. He crouched, headlamp illuminating damp stone slick with moss. Beyond, the cliff cracked open to a narrow tunnel, slick and steep. The air was cool and stale, smelling of earth and old water. He forwarded one step, then paused. From deep within the tunnel came a soft humming, echoing against the stone like children chanting a lullaby. It was distant but unmistakable, rising, and falling in a minor key that made his skin crawl. He swallowed, wiped sweat from his brow. The humming grew louder, accented by soft scraping sounds like claws dragging along stone. His rational mind screamed at him to turn back, to radio, for backup, to flee to the glow of Quitak's street lamps. But something deeper, a longing or compulsion, kept him moving. He followed the sounds until he could see at the tunnel's end a faint glow orange and flickering. A torch? Maybe a flare. He edged closer, the beam of his lamp dancing over rune-like. Scratches carved into the walls. Names, dates, children's drawings. Someone's desperate scrawl of "Help me," repeatedly etched. At last he stepped into a small cavern lit by a single bonfire at its center. Around it sat a dozen figures half buried in the rock, their torsos fused with stone in grotesque shapes. Limbs merged with jagged edges, faces frozen in agony. They stared at him with empty eyes, mouths open in silent screams. Their bodies were the missing Maggie Whitaker's swirl of braids, Levi Hargrove's broken cowboy hat, and others whose faces he recognized from faded posters. Tom's knees buckled. He stumbled backward, lamp clattering to the ground and spinning. The cavern erupted in that soft humming, louder now, as the stone-bound corpses began to shift. Limbs creaked, stone cracking as they reached toward him. He scrambled, fingers, clawing at bare rock, heart hammering. Behind him, the tunnel mouth had sealed no hollow shape of trees, no starlit sky. Only stone walls closing him in. He roared and pounded at the wall. No yield. The figures rose, dragging stony, mangled limbs. Their humming turned to a discordant wail. Tom felt the heat of the fire behind him, the stink of burning flesh and earth. He twisted, saw a narrow fissure to his left, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. Blood pounded in his ears. He forced himself forward, shoulder first, then kicked his legs free and scrambled into the gap. Sharp stone cut his arms and chest. The humming faded as he crawled, tunnel narrowing until he was wedged tight. He clawed desperately, lunging forward with every ounce of strength until his head broke through into the moonlit canyon. He fell onto his back on the ledge, breathing ragged, eyes streaming tears. Above him, the escarpment soared into darkness. Down below, the faint light of the small fire had vanished as if it had never existed. There were no bodies, no footprints, only his blood-stained palms pressed to limestone. Tom staggered to his feet and ran, heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He didn't stop until the town lights were close enough to touch, until the sheriff's cruiser sat idling at the overlook. Weapons drawn, deputies swarmed him, but when he tried to speak, his voice caught in his throat. When Sheriff Blake finally pried the words out, they were hoarse. They were there. They climbing. Then they took me in. Behind them, the cliff stood silent and unmoving, its rock face cold and unblemished, as though nothing had ever happened, but the wind still carried faint whispers, echoing names, and a promise that those shadows would never release their prey. The night air in Caddo Canyon tasted of dust and ancient stone, heavy and dry against the ranger's throat as he crept along, the narrow wash that twisted like a serpent between towering walls of weathered limestone. Moonlight sifted through, a ragged veil of clouds, casting the canyon floor in fractured silver shards. Each step he took kicked up brittle pebbles that skittered and clattered in echoes, far too loud for a place that had held silence for centuries. He paused, listening. The only sound was the impatient drum of his own heart, and then it came, low and terrible, a raw, guttural howl that reverberated off the canyon walls and burrowed into his bones. Colin Mercer had seen plenty in his 20. Years as a Texas Ranger smoke from burned-out homesteads, blood spatters on car hoods, children wandering the roadside, lost in heartbreak or worse. But nothing in his experience could have prepared him for this. The howl was inhuman, ragged as if it had torn itself free from crooked jaws and carried a hunger so profound that the canyon itself seemed to shudder. Mercer tightened his grip on the flashlight, letting its beam trace trembling circles on the canyon sides. Shadows danced like skittering shapes, and he wondered if his mind was playing tricks or if something real and hungry waited just beyond the edge of the light. He remembered the call he had gotten only hours before. Reports of missing hikers, a college student's frantic radio transmission breaking off mid-scream, then nothing for 19 hours. Folks around town whispered of old legends, the spirit of Caddo, half-deranged stories of a shape that once haunted these rocks, blamed for vanishings in the early days when Comanche and white settlers bled over this land. Mercer had scoffed at ghosts. He believed in evidence. He believed in bodies. Now he found himself stumbling into the heart of those legends, drawn deeper by a sound that felt like a summons. The beam flickered as he moved on, every step measured against the swell of that mournful cry, which rose and fell like a tide. He could feel the canyon pressing in around him, walls carved by water and wind, layered with streaks of ochre and slate. Small caves yawned in alcoves overhead, places a creature could crouch and wait. His radio crackled with static, and he pressed the PTT button to send a call. Nothing came back but hiss and white noise. Then, out of the gloom, a shape darted. It was quick and slender, impossibly upright like a man wearing the skin of a wolf. Mercer's breath caught as the figure slipped behind a boulder, fading faster. Then the light could follow. He swallowed hard, the roar of blood in his ears. No human could move like that. He forced himself forward, flashlight cutting through the dark until it landed on tracks in the soft red sand. Footprints, elongated and clawed, dragging like something half-formed. He knelt to examine them. The print at the edge of his light glistened with a wet darkness that gleamed too red. He jerked his hand back, uncertain if it was blood or something else. The howl burst again, closer now, bubbling up from some hidden fissure in the rock. Mercer backed away, heart hammering. He willed himself to think, use the training, the cold logic. Yet every instinct screamed to run, but run where? These walls rose 50 feet all around, funneling him deeper into the maze. He forced his legs to move and pressed after the sound, following its mournful cadence as if it were a guide toward salvation or doom. Ahead, the canyon opened into a shallow amphitheater, moonlight pooling like spilled milk across the flat ground. Bones lay strewn at the center, small animal skulls cracked open, rib fragments scattered like broken vows. He swallowed. The stench was faint but unmistakable, iron and rot. He swept his light around, hands trembling, and caught sight of something. In the darkness beyond the bones, a shape perched on a ledge, coiled as if ready to spring. A low growl rumbled through the canyon, shaking pebbles loose. Mercer raised his gun, mouth dry. "Who's there?" His voice rattled, and for an instant, the canyon answered with silence so deep it roared. Then eyes gleamed above him, golden and unblinking. The creature tilted its head, cocking an ear. To the hush, it stepped into the light, tall, gaunt, sinewy limbs holding it above the ground, long arms ending in spidery fingers. Its face was a horror of shadows, a muzzle that split open in rows of jagged teeth, nostrils flaring, ears pointed and ragged. It cocked its head again, regarding him with a curious intelligence that made Mercer's skin crawl. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other. Then the ranger raised the gun. The creature made a step forward, a deliberate, balletic motion that spoke of cunning and malice. Mercer's finger tightened on the trigger, and something behind him howled again, a twin cry that bounced between it. The walls. The ranger glanced back. Another figure emerged from the gloom, then another, circling him in silent procession. They moved like dancers in some grotesque ballet, clawed feet whispering on the ground. He fired. The report cracked the night. It was a sound too loud, too human, drowning in the vastness of the canyon. The bullet struck one of the creatures in the shoulder, and it yelped, a sound that tore at his conscience. The others paused, head swiveling. Mercer didn't wait to see their reaction. He turned and sprinted, boots slipping in the sand, breath ragged, heart pounding like a drum. Behind him, the canyon seemed alive with movement. Rocks tinkled as bodies crashed through underbrush, the creatures in pursuit. The moon dipped behind, fast-moving clouds plunging him into deeper darkness. He could feel them all around now, close enough that he could hear ragged breathing. He stumbled, face first into the sand, his light skittering away. Panic seized him as he scrambled to his feet, fumbling for the torch. When he found it, the beam darted wildly until it struck something at eye level. A hand, pale and lean, pressed into the sandstone wall, knuckles white. The creature's face leaned into the circle of light, eyes gleaming with a terrible, feral joy. Mercer opened fire again, once, twice, each shot echoing like thunder. The shape recoiled, retreating into a crevice. The howl rose in triumph, a chorus that swallowed his screams. He ran until his lungs burned, feet pounding against rock. He didn't know where he was going, only away from the howls, the hungry eyes, the jaws snapping at the air. Somewhere ahead, he could hear the faint drone of an engine, the promise of the ranger truck parked at the canyon rim. With a last heave of effort, he clawed his way up a steep incline, hands raw and bleeding. The howls faded behind him, but he didn't dare stop until he burst out onto the mesa and found the truck's headlights slicing through the gloom. He tumbled inside, locking the door, sliding against the seat as the engine roared to life. He tore down the dirt road without looking back. Behind him, Caddo Canyon lay silent once more, its walls holding secrets older than any man, its shadows waiting patiently for the next soul brave or foolish enough to answer the howl. And somewhere deep in that hollowed earth, the creatures watched him go, their eyes glowing in the dark, hungry for a final call that would draw him back into the depths he had fought so hard to leave. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into Mesquite Hollow Park just before dusk. The heat had finally broken, and a stiff breeze rattled the dry brush like wind chimes made of bone. My name's Harper, Ranger Harper, and I'd been assigned here 6 weeks ago, straight out of the academy. They told me it was a quiet post, a place to learn the ropes. Now I thought maybe they'd lied. The first tracks appeared at the park entrance, neat rows of human footprints pressed into the dust. They were fresh no more than hours old and led straight toward the old ranger station, the one built on stilts to keep out rattlers and rodents. I knelt and studied them, a man's size, heavy tread, heel worn smooth. No toes splayed, just a single sliding impression. Whoever or whatever made them walked like they carried a lifetime of weight. Frowning, I followed. My boots kicked up clouds of parched earth, but the prints stayed sharp, clear. As I passed the mesquite groves, their thorny branches scratched my sleeves as if warning me not to go further. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with bruised purples and reds. A mockingbird flitted overhead, calling into the fading light. My skin crawled out at the ranger station door. I paused, hand on the warped wood. The prints ended here, pointed straight at the threshold. I pressed my ear to the paneling. Nothing but silence and the hum of cicadas. I eased the door open and stepped. Inside, the room smelled of old coffee and pesticide. The papers on my desk, a stack of incident reports, lay untouched. I flicked on the lamp. Shadows leapt against the walls. Nothing stirred. But then I saw it. A single footprint stamped in dust on the floorboards directly beneath the main window, crisp and deep, as though someone had pressed their boot there 5 minutes ago. I knelt, tracing the outline with a gloved finger. Heel, arch, forefoot, toe. Perfect. And then, nothing beyond. No sign of sliding forward, no drag marks. The print simply stopped. A my D-S-O-L-E. My heart thudded. I rose slowly, eyes flicking around. The station felt too small, every corner heavy with expectation. I switched off the lamp and stepped into the porch. Night had settled. The mesquite branches swayed, casting mottled patterns of moonlight on the ground. I snapped on my flashlight and swept its beam over the clearing. No footprints. Just my own trail leading back to the entrance, yet something urged me to stay. The night air felt alive, humming with an intelligence older than me. I climbed the wooden stairs to the small back balcony. Below, the footprints glittered faintly where the beam caught the dust. They circled the station, returning to that same print beneath the window. Always the same loop. I traced the prints with my light until they vanished beneath the floorboards at the edge of the porch. Beneath, like whoever made them, had stepped into the plank and slipped down into the shadows.
Low.
My breath hitched. Beneath the station lay the crawl space, built to keep pestilence at bay. It was normally sealed. But tonight, a single board had shifted just enough to reveal a black maw of darkness. I dropped to my knees, heart hammering. and pried at the board with my knife. It came loose easily, as though someone had been waiting for me. Beneath lay nothing but empty space planks rotted thin, the earth below soft and clay-like. I shone my light into the void. Something stirred. A low, wet rasping, like a throat clearing from underground. I froze. "Hello?" My voice sounded small. The beam caught something near the back wall. A shape, hunched, pale where moonlight slipped through the cracks. I leaned forward, stupid with adrenaline. A hand reached out. Thin, bony, with nails blackened and twisted. It clamped the edge of the board and tugged. I scrambled back, dropping my torch. Darkness swallowed it. Then came the scrape of wood and bone. I yanked the board free and scrambled upright. Flashlight. In hand, I shone its beam into the gap. The crawl space was empty. Nothing moved. My breath echoed in my ears. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the light. I scrambled up the steps 2 at a time and slammed the back door shut. Inside, I bolted the door and fumbled for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Harper. I need backup at Mesquite Hollow Station, ASAP." Silence. The hum of static. Then, a click. "Harper, you there?" Relief washed me until I realized it was the station's own base channel. My call sign was dead, no response from dispatch. Not surprising on a holiday weekend. Communication black spots were all over this place. I grabbed a spade from the corner and hefted it. If something was down there, I'd do what had to be done. I swung the blade at the floor beneath the window, but the wood cracked prematurely. Splinters flying in all directions. Beneath lay the same emptiness. My light beam danced across the soil hole after hole where the rot had eaten through. I kicked at the floor, pried away more boards until I'd carved out a small opening big. Enough for a person. I knelt at the edge and peered down. Nothing. The wind rustled through the mesquite above, and for 1 second I wondered if I'd imagined it all. Then a foot erupted from the darkness, followed by a calf, a thigh, and a hip. A pale, gaunt leg. Slithering from the depths, coated in dust and detritus, my heart stopped. I scrambled back and yanked the spade down. The blade bit into bone and sinew with a sickening crunch. The creature screamed, a high-pitched keening like gravel grinding against steel. I sprang back again, but it was too fast. In a twisting, grotesque motion, it pulled itself out, face first. The features were human eyes sunk in shadow, skin white as chalk, lips peeled back in a grin that revealed teeth too long and too sharp. It reared up, filling the doorway. Mesquite thorns clung to its limbs, like threads binding its flesh to the forest outside. Its eyes gleamed with insane hunger. I stumbled, dropped the spade. It hissed and advanced. Instinct took over. I grabbed the radio mic and slammed it against its skull. The creature staggered, then slumped to the floor. I dropped the mic and seized my flashlight, swung it like a club. The beam struck its skull, and it skittered sideways, a puppet with broken strings. But even as it fell, it twisted, slid, and melted back toward the hole in the floor. Its arms scratched at the edges, pulling itself beneath the station once. More. I could only watch as its laughter echoed from below, wet, triumphant. The holes in the wood wept dirt, and the back porch reflected gibbering shadows. My radio crackled, faintly this time. "Harper? You okay?" A lifeline at last. I pressed the button. I'm in trouble," I whispered, voice trembling. "Something's here." There was a static pause. "Hold tight. We're sending Unit 2. Relief and terror warred in my chest. I sank to the floor against the wall, eyes never leaving the yawning split in the station's floorboards. Wind whispered through the gap, carrying the faint scent of mesquite and something sour, like iron and decay. I waited through the night. The moon circled overhead, and the forest stilled around me. The creature did not return, at least not openly, but I heard its footsteps in the dirt beneath, creeping, circling the station. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breaths. I thought of my family back home, of breakfast spoons clinking in the sink. I thought of morning coming, of rescue arriving. I thought of safety, but morning never felt so distant when the deputy finally broke in at first light, gun drawn. I nearly hugged him. He shone his torch into the crawl space. No sign of the creature. The floorboards lay split and scattered. But down below, pressed into the dry soil, were dozens of footprints, dozens leading away, back toward the mesquite grove. They vanished under the tangled underbrush. I stood there, shoulders shaking, as he called for cleanup crews. They'd seal the station, cordon off the trail. They'd tell me it was too dangerous, send me home. They'd file it away as unexplained, pass it on to ghost hunters and tabloid reporters hungry for a hot lead. But I knew the truth. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't gone. It never leaves. It walks in the mesquite, slipping beneath the earth, coming and going through its private corridors. And one night, when the wind howls just right, I'll hear it again, feet brushing dust, disappearing beneath the floorboards, following my scent into the heart of the station. I haven't slept since. Every creak of wood makes my heart jump. A sudden breeze rattles the door, and I brace for something to burst through. I spend my days on the trail, boots steady, eyes fixed forward, but I always scan the ground for prints. Because if I don't, stop it. One day its tracks will end at my own front door, and then there will be nothing left but silence and a hole in the floorboards where I once stood. I never believed in things you couldn't see until that night on the banks of Caddo Lake, when the static on my scanner sharpened into voices I couldn't ignore. I was alone at Tower 3, the one perched on stilts above the black water where the trees hung low, draped like mourning veils. Moss swirled in the breeze, silver in the moonlight, but the air was thick, oppressive, as though the swamp itself was holding its breath. My shift had started at sundown. The sun sank behind cypress knees, bleeding pink across the sky while the cicadas tuned up their endless chorus. I flipped on the scanner, expecting the usual chatter routine check-ins, the occasional code readout. For the first hour, it was quiet. Just the hiss of static and my own boots creaking on the wooden planks. The knot in my gut was nothing new. The forest felt alive out here, but I chalked it up to stories told by rookies who couldn't sleep. Then, around midnight, a faint voice flickered through the speaker, mangled by static. It sounded like Cooper from Tower 1, whispering, "You see it?" I tapped the mic. "Tower 1, this is Tower 3. Say again." Static. It snapped and snapped, as though someone was throttling the signal. My heart ratcheted up. I tried. Again, twice, 3 times, but the reply cut short. "Watching." "Out?" The words were blurred, but urgent. Mine shook as I keyed the mic. "Cooper, come in. You copy?" Silence, the static rushing back louder now like breath in my ear. I scanned the dial, desperate for any other ranger's voice. Instead, I heard 2 voices, overlapping, urgent whispers. "He's here, and we're losing him." Each word shredded something in me. Who was he? Who were we? The swamp was supposed to be empty at this hour, just me, the frogs, and whatever glowed beneath those dark waters. I thumbed the power switch. Nothing. The scanner was dead, plunging me into a hush so deep my own blood throbbed in my ears. Lightning flashed, brief as a phantom's grin, illuminating the treetops. In that slit of light, I thought I saw shapes, tall, thin silhouettes standing in the underbrush, too still, too purposeful. I blinked, and they vanished. I rubbed my eyes and sloshed over to the railing, peering into the shadows. Nothing but the gnarled roots and the lapping water. I forced my breath steady, convinced my mind was playing tricks. But then the scanner crackled back to life. Only this time it wasn't Cooper. It was my own voice. This is Tower 3. Repeat, Tower 3. I froze. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't keyed the mic. The voice quavered, haunted, as if coming from somewhere behind me. I spun, every nerve screaming. Empty walkway. I swallowed, voice dry. Who's there? No answer. Just the awful drip of water from a broken pipe overhead. My radio clicked again, and now it was a chorus of voices. My voice, Cooper's voice, someone else's too ragged to place. Someone's watching us. Don't turn around. Please. Bits and shards of panic that collided in my chest. I thought I'd vomit. I stumbled back into the small control room, slamming the door. Through the window, I watched the tower sway in the wind. The light on my headset flickered. I yanked it off. Enough was enough. I grabbed my flashlight and set out down the ladder, leaving the scanner feeding me madness. The swamp floor was a matted forest of roots and soft earth. Each step I took swallowed my foot, sucked my boots into the dark muck. Moss dripped from my cap brim. The beam of my flashlight wavered as I descended toward the service road, a dirt trench that cut through the trees, narrow enough for a single truck. Halfway down, I heard it, a whisper right behind me. My breath caught. I swung the light, but the beam caught only my own shadow, long and funhouse distorted. The whisper came again, soft. You shouldn't have left the tower. Come back. It was impossible. Spoken in my ear, but not by me. I hurried. The road loomed ahead. My truck's headlights were off. I'd left it idling by habit. Now the engine was stone cold. Of course. I cursed, slammed my fist against the door. Locked. The driver's side handle wouldn't budge. Panic welled, hot and vicious. I pounded on the window. Nothing. Footsteps, soft on the road behind me. Wet feet, squelching in the mud. I didn't dare look. Who's there? My voice cracked like a whip. The footsteps stopped. The swamp stilled. Then, the whispering all around me, a dozen voices overlapping, saying my name. Jackson, Jackson, come back. That was my name. Not my real name, my last name. I'd only ever given that over the radio. My breath rasped. I backed away until my spine hit the tailgate. I curled around the corner of the truck. Go. Away, I shouted, but my words were swallowed by the dark. Then a new sound, the thud of boots on wood. I whipped my light back to Tower 3. From the bottom platform, I saw them ranger silhouettes, slow-stepping down the ladder, their faces hooded in darkness. 10 figures, maybe more, each move synchronized as though they shared a single will. My legs shook. I turned to run, but the road behind me split into two, forked into identical paths that vanished into pitch. I heard a low growl behind me, so close I felt the hot breath. Something massive, too heavy for a man. My heart pounded. I froze. The growl followed me, shifting left, then right, always at the edge of the light. I let out a ragged scream. Then all at once the radio in my pocket sputtered. Crackling, I yanked it out. On the screen, it said Tower 3, but I was standing 20 feet from it. The device had to be at my hip. I watched, horrified, as the battery icon drained from full to zero in a second, then the display went blank. And from its empty speaker came the faintest whisper, "You're one of us now." A scream echoed out across the swamp from behind the tower, from inside the forest, from my own throat. I couldn't tell. I turned and sprinted toward the ladder. As I climbed, the silhouette of the first figure stepped onto the lower rung, arms outstretched, head tilted. No features, just a smooth void. I scrambled past it, up 2 rungs, feeling cold tendrils brush my back. I shoved upward. The ladder rung snapped under my weight, wood rotten, I later learned. I tumbled, crashing onto the platform. Pain exploded in my ankle. I tried to get up, but dozens of footsteps now rang out above me, pounding down from the catwalk, converging. My ankle turned sharply as I tried to twist away. I collapsed, the world spinning. They formed a circle around me, huddled close, their features still hidden in shadows. Each face pointed toward me, bodies unmoving. Then light flared. A headlamp bobbed at the tower's entrance. I thought it was backup. "Hold on, Jackson." It was Cooper's voice, clear, panicked. He dashed into the circle, beams sweeping over bodies that dropped like marionettes with their strings cut. The forest inhaled, everything silent except Cooper's labored breathing. He knelt by me. I heard it. The scanner voices. It died. He knelt, jammed his hand under my leg. "We need to get you out." He half lifted me. I winced, ankle screaming. He grabbed my radio. "I'm calling it in, please, just hold on." But the radio was dead silent tomb. He cursed. "My truck's locked too?" He stood, scanning the tree line. We're not alone. The wind gusted, carrying 1,000 whispers. We were pinned. A deer and headlights trapped by ghost stories come to life. A branch snapped behind Cooper. He spun, flashlight falling to the ground and clattering off the platform. The light beam swung across the circle, and they moved faster than flesh and bone should. They coalesced, melting shadows that licked the floorboards, reaching for us. Cooper screamed and leapt into me, tackling me behind the control console. The beam went out. My world went black. Then I heard my own voice again, taunting. "You should have stayed inside." It wasn't me. And it whispered close, so close. "Now you belong." I don't remember what happened next. Cooper's hand felt hot as he dragged me into the little metal room. He slammed the door. We huddled in the corner, bodies pressed against the wall. The rustle of their heavy breathing was in the next room. The latch rattled but held. Dawn came soft and gray. The air lost its weight. The mist rose from the swamp in fragile tendrils. We stayed silent until the sun cleared the horizon. Then, when the world felt solid again, Cooper pried the door open. The circle was gone. The ladder was gone. The swamp was empty, no footprints, no signs we'd ever been here. We hobbled down the tower ladder into the damp morning. My radio still hissed empty. Cooper led me to his truck, which now sat unlocked, engine warm. We didn't speak until we reached the station office, and even then only to log our shift. That afternoon they found Tower 3 abandoned. No bodies, no ladder, just a radio on the floor, freshly powered up, spitting out static. When they brought it to me, I flipped the switch. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then, from that little speaker, I heard my own voice, clear and calm. "Someone's watching us." Then the signal cut out. Late in the afternoon, when the sky bled into shades of orange and purple over the endless dunes of West Texas, I spotted him far off the shoulder of Highway 290, a lone figure standing rigid against the wind, thumb raised in a silent plea. Heat waves shimmered off the asphalt, warping his shape into something half human, half mirage. I eased the ranger's truck to a halt, perhaps too close to where the sand met the road. The tires crunched over tumbleweed and brittle twigs. My radio crackled with static, the kind of low hum that makes your skin itch, and I squinted at the stranger, trying to read his face through the haze. He was dressed too neatly for this stretch of desert, a clean white shirt, dark boots unscuffed, his thumb still extended in that almost pleading gesture. Sweat trickled down my neck, and I wondered if I'd mistaken fatigue for hallucination. Stepped out, the door banging behind me, and a gust stirred up loose sand at my feet. The hitchhiker didn't flinch. His eyes were hidden behind aviator sunglasses, so I couldn't see if they were alive. Need a ride? I called my voice. Rough from wind and unsmoked cigarettes. No response. I walked closer, my boots sinking half an inch into the hot granules. A tremor of unease crept up my spine as I noticed his thumb had gone limp, pointing neither up nor down, but hanging as though severed. The dust around his boots was unmarked by the usual 2 prints. Instead, it looked as though he were floating. On the surface. "Hey," I said again, "you can't hitch here. It isn't safe." The sun sank lower, painting the desert in bone-white shadows. As I reached the edge of the sand, my foot broke through, and I felt the ground give way beneath me. Horror clawed at my ribs. Quicksand. But he stayed perfectly poised, as if planted on solid ground. I lunged forward, steadied myself against the door frame, and when I looked back, the hitchhiker was gone. No swivel of the head, no shuffle of feet, nothing but the emptiness of the blowing sand. The only proof he had ever existed were his footprints, a neat pair of impressions leading from the road into the dune field, each sole stamped with a weird pattern I couldn't place. They trailed off into the soft sloping ground until they disappeared altogether, swallowed by the sinkhole of quicksand. I approached cautiously, the dying light casting long, sinister fingers across the scene. Thorny tumbleweeds scuttled across the road, kicked by a sudden gust, and I could hear my own heart beating slow at first, then hammering like a rusted engine. I clicked on my flashlight, its beam a feeble glow in the growing twilight, and crouched. By the empty footprints, they had sunk into the sand until the borders were half buried, as though the earth itself reached out to drag them under. A chill roamed the hairs on my arms despite the desert heat. I imagined what might await below. That thin, crust-twisted roots of mesquite trees, old carcasses of rodents, and perhaps something worse that hadn't seen the sun in decades. With trembling fingers, I ran my hand along the edge, feeling the cold wetness beneath the surface. My skin prickled. The radio crackled again, a child's laugh cutting through the static so sharp it stung my ear. I spun, sweeping the beam across. The empty expanse. The landscape was silent, but for the whisper of sand blown by the wind. The sound repeated, a thin, high-pitched giggle, like a little girl playing hide-and-seek. I swallowed, my throat dry. "If anyone's out there, identify yourself," I barked. But the only reply was the crackle and that uncanny laugh that seemed to come from beneath the earth. I backed away from the quicksand, kicking at the loose grains until they cascaded into the hole. My boots struck something solid just under the surface, an old wooden sign, half rotted. I crouched again and scraped away the sand, revealing faded letters. "Don't trust the signal." My heart lurched. The sign had once been bright white, but decades of sun and wind had bleached and battered it. The last letters were gone, and I couldn't tell who had carved it or why. I clutched the notepad in my pocket, standard issue ready to record any hazard, but this felt like something reaching out from the dark corners of memory rather than a simple warning. A sudden gust blew the sand into my face, and when I blinked the grains clear, the hitchhiker stood at the edge of my beam. Again, he wore that pristine shirt, his thumb pointing at me. His mirrored glasses glinted. I stammered for words, but he only tilted his head as though asking silently if I wanted to follow. My legs knotted up, but some forced duty, stupidity, curiosity made me step closer. Each footfall seemed to draw the world's warmth out of the air, and the wind died, leaving an unnatural stillness. The desert's lullaby cut off, and I felt exposed, like a hunted animal. He raised a hand, beckoning, and a low voice threaded its way into my mind. Not through the radio, not spoken, but like a seed planted under my scalp. "Follow me." The beam of my flashlight pivoted on his boots, and I saw that where his footprints had been, there were none again. He was standing on the soft scars of the dune as though the sand contoured itself to him. The dry heat soured in my chest, and I tasted copper on my tongue. Something inside my head screeched, "But you know better. Turn away." I stumbled back, hand shaking on my gun holster, and the figure remained silent, thumb still pointed skyward. The hush stretched unbearably long, until the wind blew again, scattering sand like powdered bone. And in that second of motion, when my eyes flicked down, the ranger truck was gone. The road looked abandoned, as if the truck had never existed. No skid marks, no tire tracks, just the unbroken ribbon of black asphalt receding toward the horizon. The hitchhiker weaved forward as though into the belly of the earth, and I chased a fleeting urge to call after him, to pull him from whatever hell he inhabited. My radio crackled once more. "Ranger Collins, come in." "What's your status?" The voice was urgent, concerned. I answered in a voice I barely recognized. I'm at a hazard marker in the desert." I glanced down at the half-buried sign, its warning more cryptic than ever. Then I turned back. The figure had vanished again, leaving only the whisper of sand shifting across the dunes. Behind me, the sign shivered in the wind as though vibrating with some silent laughter. I dropped to my knees and pried the sign free, the wood splintering under my grip. I held it to the dying light, but whatever words remained were lost in knots of rot. My radio chirped insistently, and I climbed to my feet, carrying the sign like a shroud. The desert swallowed my footprints the moment I set them. Each step felt unnatural, as though the ground rose up to erase my passage. Anxiety churned in my gut. I knew if I stayed, I'd be lost in that sand, forever erased like those footprints. I walked until I felt the vibration of a diesel engine beneath the dunes and rounded a bend to see the ranger's truck. Headlights off, parked where I'd left it. The door was ajar. I climbed in, hard hammering, slid the sign onto the passenger seat, and locked the doors. The engine started on the first turn of the key, smooth and reassuring. I pressed the sign against my chest and drove out of the desert before I even realized my foot was on the throttle. Miles later, the quicksilver moon rose over the plains, and I glanced at the dashboard clock. 11:43 p.m., my radio remained silent, as though abandoned. Sweat cooled on my forehead. I set the sign on the passenger seat again, willing the rot to reveal at least a letter or two, but nothing changed. Only that deep, rattling echo of laughter lurked between the dunes of my mind. In the mirror, the desert stretched away, dark and promising. And somewhere back there, I knew, a lone figure still stood, thumb raised, waiting for the next ranger to heed the signal. He saw it first as a flicker, a distant bobbing of light that seemed too regular to be windblown torch fire, too forlorn to be anything but deliberate. The Texas night hung heavy and still, the pines whispering secrets he could not quite catch. Ranger Cole Delgado paused on the narrow logging road, listening to the wind sigh through branches like distant voices. The moon was a wan, pale eye in the sky, glimpsed only in patches through the canopy. He raised a gloved hand, shading his flashlight's beam, and found the lantern again, a warm, wavering glow half a mile ahead, swinging in slow arcs against the dark. He shouldn't have been out here alone. Summer was wildfire season. Thick, with souls lost to heat-stroke and flame, but reports of a lost hiker had drawn him beyond the safe perimeter. That lantern ought to have been impossible. No road, no path, nothing but tangled undergrowth and lonesome geology. Yet there it was, beckoning him into the heart of the dark pine tract. He zipped the collar of his jacket and stepped off the tila, rode into soft loam, boots sinking slightly. Every step carried him deeper into a place older than memory, where time gathered like dust. The lantern swung on a rusted iron hook driven into a leaning cedar stump. Its glass was streaked with grime, but inside the flame burned golden and steady, as though invited by hunger. Cole half expected the forest to recoil, branches creaking back, shadows pulling away, yet instead animals stirred. A distant howl, the snap of a twig behind him, and somewhere overhead, the brush of feathered wings so close he thought he might feel the wind of a bat's wingtip. He swallowed, the air tasting of smoke and mildew, and reached out, curious against better judgment. When he touched it, the lantern fell silent, the flame snuffed, and the world seemed to tilt. At his feet lay a faint depression in the earth, half hidden by pine needles and brambles. The corners of a roofline, beams cast in brittle cedar, slanting downward into a shallow mound. A cabin, half buried by time and debris. The lantern's hook, he realized too late, was fixed to one of its roof joists. He dropped the lantern as though it burned his fingers and took a step back. The forest pressed closer, pinning him with watches made of emptiness dot by the light of his flashlight. The cabin looked small, barely 10 feet square, its door sealed by a fallen bough and woven vines. The logs were blackened, charred long ago, but curious notches carved into their ends glinted with a pale luster like bone. Cole's breath hitched. If this structure had weathered a fire, what held it in its place now? A hum rose around him, a low vibration that took shape in the hush. It was the lantern again, swinging just inside through a gap in the logs. Though the glass was cracked and its wick charred to ruin, he knelt and pressed his ear to the wood. At first there was only his own pulse ticking like a metronome, then a muffled thrum, as if someone or something was moving within. He reached for the door with the barrel of his pistol, half expecting the thing inside to lunge. But the moment the wood gave beneath his push, a wave of heat washed over him, and the lantern's glow now bright orange flooded the cabin's interior. The hush shattered. In the back corner, a figure knelt over a low dais of stones, poised, in a taut garment that shifted between charcoal and flesh. It held a second lantern, identical, its flame rippling as though alive. The figure's head was bowed. Hair like wet twigs fell across its shoulders. Its shoulders jerked once, twice, and then the flame met air, and it looked up. There were no eyes, only the concave hollows of wood, smooth, polished, and deep. But beneath their emptiness, the flame's light trembled. Cole stepped back, fumbling. "For calm!" He called out, his voice small and brittle, but the thing tilted its carved head as though listening, and the dry notchwork of its mouth stretched into a crooked grin. A snapping sound echoed behind him, a rib loosening, a wooden slat snapping, yet he could not tell from where. His boots felt as though weighed by lead. The undergrowth before him rippled, and from the dark beyond the cabin, as many lights as stars winked on. Dozens of lanterns hung from limbs, dangling like lost souls. He raised his weapon reflex more than resolve, but his hand shook so hard the sight was useless. All at once the figure wept a sound that was metal on metal, a scraping keening that seemed to open a wound in the night itself. The lantern in its hand swung higher, flinging arcs of molten light against the logs. And then behind him, the door board collapsed with a crack, and a shape emerged. Ragged clothes, skin the pale hue of old milk, eyes black pits leaking oil. It bore no lantern, but stepped in time with a melody of distant drums, a hunting beat that pressed against his chest. Cole's instincts screamed to run, but his legs stayed rooted. The first figure stood and drifted forward, each movement punctuated by sparks falling from the lantern's flame. Behind it, more shapes joined, a parade of hushed silhouettes, faces carved from driftwood, hands jointed like broken branches. The ghostly assembly moved in, forming a ring of lanterns and faces. The figure with the lantern halted 3 paces away, its grin widening until the empty eyes tilted upward, reflecting his light back at him. He saw in that reflection a name he did not know and a time he never lived. The lantern's flame flicked, and within its heart he saw the ruin of this place, the flash of a cabin fire raging in the wind, a family caught in the blaze, the logs collapsing, the ground swallowing their screams. He saw his own face dangled. From a hook, torso half buried in ash, the lantern he carried swinging just beyond his fingertips. The wind rose, sudden enough to snuff every other light but theirs. The drumming halted. The faces grew sharper, whittled by flame. He stumbled backward, and they closed in, silent but for the rasp of the wood flesh that clung to their frames. Cole's breath came hot and foul. Sweat and fear lined his teeth. He raised the pistol, level as though it might sever the nightmare from its source, and fired. The shot rang like thunder. The figure crumpled, lantern shattering, light snuffed, and with a keening wail the circle broke. Lanterns fell from limbs and shattered on stones, their dim glow dissipating. The night went silent save for Cole's ragged panting. The forest seemed to lean in watching. He looked at the body, saw nothing but charred rags and a broken wooden mask. The cabin lay still, its doorway yawning like a mouth. He backed away, tripped over brambles, and scrambled across the soft earth until the logging road reappeared under his boots. The canopy lifted, revealing the pale moon, the quiet road. He did not look back as he ran. Only when the road ended and he burst onto the highway did he dare lift his flashlight high. There was no cabin, no stump with a hook, no dancing light. Only the highway stretching empty under the moon, and somewhere behind him, carried on the wind, a soft click where the lantern must have swung free. He kept running. The lantern's glow, they'd call it the legend of the ranger who chased. A light into the dark and never quite left. And as he crossed that line of yellow paint, he felt it still, a warmth at his side, a weight in his pack, and the promise of another flicker beckoning him back into the wood. The wind had dropped to a whisper by the time I saw the first glow of moonlight spilling across the dusty courtyard of Belmont Park. That old ghost town just off Highway 67, where nothing had stirred for decades except crows and tumbleweeds. The sheriff's cruiser was parked crooked by the chapel steps, lights off, engine cold. And I knew he'd been here earlier, though maybe I was the only one who noticed his footprints scuffed deep into the sand. I climbed out, the gravel crunching, under my boots, and drew a breath that tasted of rot and rust. From somewhere above, clear as a funeral knell, sounded the bell. Boom, boom at exactly 3 a.m. Though everyone knew the door to the tower had been rusted shut since '54. That first toll felt like a hand, clamped around my heart, cold and unrelenting, and I could almost make out the echo rolling through the empty saloon, the old jail, the rickety porches. My radio crackled static at first, then a high-pitched yelp, and I almost dropped it before the faint voice of Dispatcher Harris came through. "Ranger Carter, you still there?" I forced my voice steady. "Yeah, I'm here. You hear it too?" Silence, then. I thought it was an open mic. The bell tolled again, slow, deliberate, and I glanced west to the chapel door, saw its metal latch completely fused by rust, covered in spider webs and decades of neglect. Still, the chime rang out as if pulled by a gloved hand. My skin prickled, and the air around me shimmered as though the world itself was bending inward to listen. I took a step toward the steps and realized my breath formed clouds in the summer. Night. It shouldn't. The desert doesn't do frost. I swallowed hard and moved, every nerve alive with dread, the third toll still lingering in the air like smoke. The chapel door stared back at me, black and lifeless, but a single plank of wood had splintered near the hinges, as though someone had tried and failed to kick it in. Sawdust and wood chips littered the threshold, fresh. My heart hammered, and I thought of the legend old man McCall told me, that once a year, on the anniversary of the town's burning, the bell tolls for the lost souls trapped inside miners and homesteaders, women and children, all caught in the blaze that claimed the town 80 years ago. Folks said their ghosts walked the street then, begging for release, but I never believed in ghosts. Not until tonight. The wind picked up, rattling the broken windows of the boarded-up schoolhouse, carrying a distant clatter like chains being dragged. A metallic tang filled my mouth blood. I pressed my tongue to my lips. They were dry and cracked, nothing but dust. From behind me came a soft, scuttling sound like bare feet on gravel, and I turned. Nothing but darkness between the street lamp posts, but I could feel something watching just beyond the cone of light. I raised my flashlight, the beam cutting a swath through the black, landing on the bell tower's arched louvered windows. No sign of life, but then the toll came again, 4 slow strokes, and the ground under my feet vibrated as if something massive stirred just above me. My radio sputtered with static and then a burst of panicked chatter. "He's on the tower, do you read me?" I dropped the radio, heart seizing, and the beam of my flashlight jerked upward. Through the louvers I glimpsed a silhouette, tall, spindly, with arms too long for any human and a head that cocked as if listening. It pressed its face to the slats, and I saw its eyes pillars of coal-black sorrow that burned with a hunger I'd never imagined. It raised a hand and pushed out on the wood, forcing the door inward just enough that the latch groaned. Then it vanished from sight, retreating into shadow, and the bell tolled one final time. Boom, slow, crushing. The vibration shot up my bones. I felt tears slide down my cheeks, hot and salty. Harris's voice crackled through, distorted. "Ranger. Carter, backup's en route. What's your status?" I forced a laugh, but it died in my throat. I'm fine," I lied. "Just doing my job." I squared my shoulders, swallowed past the lump in my throat, and laid my hand on the cold door. It shifted under my fingers, the rotten wood splintering, and I felt the tower's breath like the last exhale of a dying beast pressing against me from the inside. Something thumped above, a low, deliberate heartbeat that echoed through the beams and joists. The loose boards under my palms snapped, and the hatch above me rattled. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, half expecting to open them to a collapsed doorway, but when I jumped back, the latch had cleared. The door swung inward unsquealing. Hinges and a darkness deeper than midnight stared back at me. I could hear the bell's dying resonance, like a sorrowful wail, lingering in the rafters. My knees buckled, and I stumbled, gripping the broken wood. In that cavernous blackness I sensed movement. Something descending, the silhouette again, long arms outstretched as if to embrace me. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into a void so complete I was sure I would never see again. I fumbled for my radio, yanked the battery pack. It was dead. My heart pounded loud enough to drown out everything, and then I heard it. The soft slap of footsteps touching down on the chapel floor behind me. I spun, arms raised, but there was nothing. Only moonlight filtering through shattered glass and dust motes drifting like spirits in the breeze. And then the bell tolled once more, faint as a memory but clear, and I knew in that instant that the dead had left the tower. They were here with me, filling the ancient chapel with their silent grief. I turned and ran, trampling the broken boards, my boots slipping on sawdust, charging into the open night without looking back. The wind roared in my ears, and I could swear the chapel sighed behind me as if watching me flee. I didn't stop until I hit my cruiser, slammed the door, and slammed my head against the wheel. The ignition sputtered and caught, headlights blinding me as I tore away from Belmont Park. In the rearview mirror, the chapel receded into the desert, dark and silent once more, its bell hanging still, its tower door sealed again by rust and time. But I could still hear the tolling in my mind, and during every turn of that rusted bell, I remembered the eyes in the louvers, the shape in the dark, and the way the dead had reached for me at 3 a.m., calling me home. When Deputy Tom McKinley stepped off the dusty two-lane road into the underbrush, the cicadas fell silent behind him as if startled by his presence. He straightened his Stetson, the brim casting a deep shadow across his weathered face, and adjusted the weight of his patrol rifle against his shoulder. The sun was sinking in the west, streaking the sky with blood-red light that seeped through the live oaks and mesquite like a slow leak. He was here because someone or something had reported a strange growth at the edge of the Angelina National Forest, vines crawling across the trail markers like a living warning. He had a badge to serve, and he'd never turn back from a call, no matter how foolish it might seem. At first, the vines were easy to miss, just a tangle of green winding among the fallen leaves. But as he advanced, he realized the green glow was almost too deep, too vibrant for this time of year. They snaked across the path in deliberate coils, curling around ferns and clinging to shrubs with tiny, spidery tendrils. A single vine brushed against his calf, and he jerked back only to discover a thin strand had wrapped itself so tightly it cut into his boot leather, drawing a bead of blood. He knelt to inspect it, shining his flashlight along its length. The vine skin was slick and rubbery, like the arm of a serpent. Tiny thorns no bigger than porcupine quills lined its surface, each tipped with a droplet of viscous sap that glinted in the beam. He touched one carefully with the tip of his glove. The moment he made contact, a shockwave of pain shot up his finger. He yanked away, but the sap clung, leaving behind a thorn-shaped bruise that blossomed almost instantly into a ruby welt. The pain throbbed, rhythmic and unrelenting, as though the vine pulsed with some ancient heartbeat. He fumbled for his radio, breath catching in his throat. "Sheriff Walker, come in," he said, voice tight. "You see these?" He stopped, his heart thudding. The vines were moving. They slid across the ground as though alive, inching toward him with a deliberate slowness that made his skin crawl. He stepped back, aiming his flashlight at the darkest tangle ahead. But whenever he shone the beam there, the vines retreated, vanishing into the shadows, only to reappear behind him when he looked away. "Tom, you okay?" Sheriff Walker's voice crackled. "You sound on edge," he swallowed hard. "It's these vines." "They're—" He crushed the radio button. As a vine shot out and wrapped around his ankle, tightening with uncanny speed. Pain exploded up his leg. He kicked, but the vine held fast, cutting into his flesh. He fired a warning shot into the tangle, the bullet pinging off unseen wood. The vines recoiled, but not before releasing a spray of sap that spattered across. His boot, searing hotter than acid. He wrenched free and stumbled backward, fury and fear colliding in his chest. His boots churned loose soil as he sprinted back toward the road, unsure where safety lay. The vines stretched behind him in long arcs, rooting themselves in the ground, crawling faster than any plant had a right to. His radio lay forgotten at his hip. He burst out onto the road, chest heaving as he scanned the edge of the forest. The vines had stopped at the asphalt, coiling against the tree line like a writhing sea. He backed away, slipping on gravel, until the headlights of Sheriff Walker's cruiser cut through the dusk. Walker jumped out, eyes widening when he saw the welts on Tom's leg and the sap tracks glistening on his boot. "What in God's name?" Walker whispered before Tom could answer. A low rustling rose from the tree line. Leaves shook without. Breeze. Branches bent as though something massive moved just out of sight. He felt the vines twitch as if commanded by intelligence. Then the ground cracked where they met the road, fissuring the asphalt in a spiderweb pattern. Walker yanked him back as a tendril as thick as a fire hose burst from the ground, snapping taut and recoiling with the force of a catapult. It disappeared back into the woods with an echoing crack. Walker fumbled for his shotgun. "Get in the car," he ordered. Tom didn't hesitate. They slammed the doors shut, wheels screaming as they peeled away from the scene. Through the rear window, Tom watched the vines spread across the road, swallowing lane markings, creeping toward them despite the speed. The forest seemed to breathe behind it, alive with hungry green dot at the station. They locked Tom in the infirmary while Walker called for help. Every hour, they cleaned and redressed his wounds, but the welts refused to fade. New ones appeared overnight along his ribs and arms, tiny thorn scars that wept sap whenever they opened. His nightmares thickened. At home, he'd wake to find vines crawling along his bedroom walls, dripping wet and wriggling in the moonlight. He'd shut his eyes, pray, and open them to find the vines gone, but the damp smell of earth and rot lingered. They brought in botanists and entomologists, but no one could identify the creature. The vines devoured anything organic, leaves, insects, even small animals that wandered too close. Cameras left in the forest recorded nothing but shadows and midnight glimmers, occasional flickers of glowing sap. Attempts to burn the vines back only made them recoil deeper into the earth, re-emerging stronger and more expansive. No herbicide worked. Chainsaws stalled when they neared the tangle, blades thickening with sap until the motors stalled. Tom returned to the site, strapped in Kevlar gear and sprayed with every available chemical deterrent. He walked the trail again, heart pounding as the vines quivered in the gloom. He pressed forward until he reached the heart of the infestation, an ancient oak, its trunk entwined in multiple layers of vine. At its base, a mass of roots had erupted. From the soil, forming a shape like a crouching figure hunched over a shallow grave. The vines pulsed in time with Tom's own heartbeat, or so it seemed. He raised his rifle and fired point blank into the root mass. The oak shuddered, then split down the middle with a thunderous crack. But the vines only laughed, or at least the sound of snapping wood reverberated like laughter in his ears. He stumbled back as the root figure rose, dozens of thick vines, weaving into limbs and a torso. It stood 8 feet tall, crowned with a leafy head that seemed almost human in its form. Its eyes hollows in the tangle gazed at him with malevolence. He felt a wave of vertigo as the creature advanced, every plant strand moving in uncanny synchronization, jerking like puppet strings. He squeezed the trigger, but the rifle exploded in his hands. Pain seared through his palms. He dropped the weapon and stumbled away, mind reeling. He heard the vines snick as they fanned out, falling upon him like vipers. He covered his face, but the thorns pierced his gear and bit into his skin. Everything went black. When he woke, he was lying on the forest floor beneath the broken oak. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, bright and oblivious. The vines were gone. He staggered to his feet, every step sending fresh jolts of pain through his limbs. The root figure lay collapsed at the base of the oak, now just a pile of inert vines and leaves. He knelt, touched one, and felt only dead stiffness. No sap, no pulse. He staggered back to the road and flagged down a passing motorist. When deputies arrived, they searched the forest for hours but found no trace of the entity. They loaded Tom into the cruiser, and as they pulled away, he swore he saw those same vines slithering beneath the car's undercarriage, slipping between the tires. He slammed his eyes shut, but when he opened them again, they were gone. That night, he lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, blood vessels throbbing beneath the welts that tracked his body like secret cartography. He felt feverish, and the air in his bedroom grew thick and humid as though summer had come early. He sat up and saw small vines unfurling from beneath the mattress, inching along the carpet toward his knitstand. He lunged for the lamp, but the growl that escaped his throat froze him in place. The vines crept closer, stubby thorns grazing the toe of his boot. He crushed them underfoot, but more sprouted in their place, climbing along his pant leg up toward his hip. His breath came in ragged gasps. He reached for his belt, felt the buckle. A vine had looped around it, biting deep into the leather. He tried to wrench free, but the vine pulled taut, lifting him off the mattress. He screamed for help, but only the rustle of leaves answered. The vines tightened, pulling him sideways. His head hit the knit stand with a sick crack, and the lamp fell, shattering on the floor. The glass fragments glimmered like stars against the carpet, and from the broken bulb a faint, sickly light glowed. A spray of sap covered Tom's cheek, and the last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him was the living oak tree rising from his ceiling, its branches stretching out across his bedroom walls. When deputies forced the door hours later, they found the room immaculate. No vines, no stains, no broken glass. Only a single dark stain on the ceiling in the shape of an oak leaf from which sap dripped in slow, deliberate arcs. And somewhere behind that stain, something waited, patient and hungry. The march of cicadas filled the humid air as Ranger Cole Avery pushed through a tangle of yawping holly and saw palmetto, his flashlight beam catching shifts of red in the undergrowth. He'd been tracing the edge of Pine Island Creek all afternoon, following reports of foul runoff from an old logging road, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight that lay ahead. A narrow stream, its surface congealed to an impossible crimson. It glimmered under the waning sun like a wound opened in the earth, an artery laid bare. He knelt at the bank and peered into the water, expecting rust or sediment, but the liquid glowed too bright, too saturated. It looked alive, and it looked angry. He dipped a finger into the current and pulled it out coated in sticky red film. He tasted it with a grimace, nothing metallic, no acrid tang, but a thin sweetness that slithered down his throat and raised the hairs on the back of his neck. He frowned. "Pollutants don't taste like cotton candy," he muttered. He paused, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, and looked into the stream again. That's when he saw the face dot. It wasn't his own reflection. The headlamps. Light caught something pale just beneath the rippling surface. A stranger's visage, slick and perfect, staring back. The man's skin was too white, almost luminescent, his eyes unfocused and cavernous. His hair drifted around him like kelp in slow motion. Cole recoiled, pressed his palm to his chest as if to stop his heart from racing. He blinked, and the vision was gone. Only the red currents shifting over submerged stones remained. He let out a shaky breath and rose, scanning the bank for any sign of trespassers, but there was only the gaunt silhouette of pine trees and the endless drone of insects. He checked his watch, 8:17 p.m., then looked back at the stream, frowning. Ranger Avery had seen carcasses dragged out of these woods before, deer strangled by wire snares, raccoons trussed with fishing line. He'd pulled more than one feral hog from muddy backwaters, but he'd never tasted blood-red water or seen a drowned man's face appear in it. He used the digital tester on his wrist, the one they issued for flash floods and high water rescues. It beeped and flashed low battery before fizzing out entirely. Of all nights to lose power. A shiver ran up his spine as he took a half-step backward, the flashlight swinging wide enough to nick the nearest tree. The beam caught movement at the edge of its radius. A shape, hunched behind a cedar, too still. To be a deer, not the shape of any animal he knew. Cole's hand brushed the holster at his hip, though his service pistol was no match for the strange forces gathering around this stream. He swallowed and forced himself to advance another few feet, hard hammering. "Hello?" He called into the gloom. "Texas Parks and Wildlife. You there?" No answer. The shape melted deeper into shadow. The air thickened like breathing through damp cloth. He realized then that the red water was rising, inching up the bank with a determined slowness, spreading across exposed roots that should have been bone dry by now. He looked down at his boots. Crimson seeped into the leather. Panic pricked at his temples, but he forced himself to stay calm. A ranger's duty was to document, to observe. If there was contamination, if someone was dumping toxic waste in state land, he'd log samples and call in a crew. He crouched at the edge, gathered a handful of the water in a plastic vial, and brought it to his flashlight beam. He expected carnation pink, but the liquid was the color of fresh arterial blood, an opaque scarlet that swallowed the light. He raised the vial to eye level, searching for particles, sediment, any impurity, but saw only droplets clinging to the glass like rubies. And then, behind him, a wet scrape on the dirt. He spun, heart in his throat, and trained his light on the opposite bank. There sat a figure, knees drawn to its chest, head buried in its arms. The flashlight flickered as he aimed, illuminating the back of a man's head-slick black hair plastered to pale skin. The moment the beam hit, the figure stiffened, head snapping up. Cole felt bile rise as those same cavernous eyes met his. The man's face was wrong. Too symmetrical, too bright, as though carved from alabaster and polished with tears. The eyes, they reflected no light, they absorbed it. The stranger tilted his head, revealing a long, needle-like smile beneath sunken cheeks. He opened his mouth and spoke, but no sound emerged, only the rippling of water, as if his voice were suspended in the stream itself. Cole took a step back, stumbling over a gnarled root, but the stranger rose with a fluid grace, water droplets flying from his jeans ankles. With each step, the earth beneath him grew stained, crimson veins spreading outward like roots. Cole fumbled for his radio, keyed it. "Base, this is Avery. I've got contamination, maybe no, something living here. Request backup and hazmat, ASAP." The radio crackled with static, then a faint voice. "Copy, Avery. ETA 20 minutes. Cole's breath caught. 20 minutes was an eternity. He trained the beam on the stranger again, but the man was no longer human. Water ran down his arms, pooling in the palms of his hands before dribbling off each finger like scarlet candles melting. He raised one hand and pointed at the vial swinging from Cole's grip. Cole blinked, and suddenly the vial shattered in his fist, cutting his thumb. Pain flared, hot and real, and he clamped the other hand over the wound. The crimson fluid seeped through his glove, merging with the red stream at his feet. Distant thunder rumbled as low clouds rolled overhead, blotting out the last light. Cole's world narrowed, the taste of copper in his mouth, the line of red water inching closer, the stranger's face now framed by the beam like an accusation. He hauled his flashlight up, but the batteries failed, and darkness swallowed him. He cursed under his breath, patting his pockets for spares nothing. Then he heard it, a slow, wet laugh rising from the creek, a sound that might have been water lapping against stone, or the stranger's sinister amusement. Heart hammering. Cole turned on his heels and fled, boots slapping on leaf litter, lungs burning. He ran until the trees thinned, burst into the service road, headlights slicing through the night as a single patrol truck coasted toward him. He flagged it down, stumbling to the door, wide-eyed and breathing ragged. "Get me away from there," he gasped. Two officers leaped out, rifles drawn. They crossed the road and shone their beams into the woods, but saw nothing but black trunks and glinting red water glimmering like a wound. One of them radioed for hazmat. Cole watched through the cracked window as the stranger emerged, stepping from the bank to stand in the middle of the creek bed. The red water pooled around his boots, reluctant to let him go. He turned his face toward Cole's patrol truck, raised both arms in a grotesque wave. Then he sank slowly into the creek, vanishing beneath the surface. The water stilled. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but a silent red mirror. Then a single drop silver and glinting rose from the center of the stream and hovered like a tear before falling back into the crimson flow. Cole felt the cab sway as the other officers loaded him into the back seat. He pressed his head against the cool door, thumbs digging through his palms, and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, a smear of red ran along the glass, as if someone had reached up and dragged a wet handprint across the window. He stared at it until he couldn't anymore, then turned his head and stared at his own reflection in the dark mirror of the windshield. He tasted the memory of the water on his tongue and remembered the stranger's hollow eyes, the smile that was all teeth. He never learned who the man was or what he wanted. The stream was cordoned off, sampled, tested, nothing toxic ever found. Yet every ranger who walked that creek, every scientist who waded its banks, reported the same thing. Water as clear as wine, colored by some unseen algae. No one ever tasted cotton candy sweetness again, and no one ever saw a face other than their own staring back. But at night, if you listen close by Pine Island Creek, you can hear water sloshing over stones, a hushed whisper carried on the breeze, a voice calling your name, inviting you to taste. And sometimes, if you stand still long enough, you will see something pale drifting beneath the surface, and it will smile. The four of them moved in single file beneath a moon that had yet to climb above the jagged outline of the Chisos Mountains, the desert air thick with creosote and the distant cry of a lonely coyote. Buck led, chest tight with the hush of this place at night, the blackness folding around them until each step felt swallowed. Behind him came Ramos, Morgan, and Chun, their breaths shallow, every crunch of gravel magnified. They were on the trail of a lost hiker, an amateur scrambler who'd radioed in panic at sundown, and they expected nothing more exotic than dehydration or a twisted ankle. Instead, they found something older than any quake-etched canyon stalking. Just out of reach it began when Ramos paused at the lip of a dry wash, hands resting on his hips, scanning the slopes. He knelt and examined tracks in the dust forceps, spaced just far enough apart for one man in a quick, steady walk. "There," he said, tracing a fifth print, faint and shrouded by the slide of loose rock. They crowded around until the tinsel, the toloned until the tinser, they crowded around until the pinzoned until the moon's sliver peeked over the peaks and silvered the ground. 5 sets of prints. But they were only 4 rangers. They rose together, uneasy. Ramos looked back uphill as though expecting to see a 5th silhouette weaving among the mesquite, but saw only darkness and the blink of distant stars. He shook his head. Wind, I guess. They pressed on, voice radios humming quietly, the beam of each headlamp crossing and recrossing the desert as if they were fish in a sea of shadow. Every now and then, when the wind picked up, someone thought. They caught a glimpse of a shape just beyond the rim of the wash, a lanky shadow that paused when they did, always staying the same distance behind. At first they laughed it off. Morgan cracked a half-hearted joke about a 5th ranger they'd never heard of, but the laughter died in their throats when Chun's light swept past a tall, slender form standing on a ridge, motionless, face turned to them, utterly still. Chun blinked. The form was gone. By the time they reached the old pipeline road, their nerves frayed. They stepped in lockstep, rifles loose in their grips, scanning the scrub with mounting dread. Buck counted them off. 1, 2, 3, 4. He hesitated. On 4, because that phantom hadn't budged. He whispered it to himself, as if speaking it might summon something worse. The road narrowed here, arches of juniper leaning in close enough to scrape shoulders. The night felt too alive, like something was moving just beyond the circle of light. Then Morgan stumbled, his boot catching on a jut of limestone. He landed hard, the butt of his rifle skittering away. Ramos bent to help him, but Morgan only shook his head and tapped the beam at the far edge of the juniper. There, a figure, impossibly erect, its rifle slung casually over one shoulder. It stood so still the branches around it did not stir, and the air around them grew colder. Ramos dropped his hand from Morgan's shoulder. "Jesus," he said, dropping to one knee as if the cold had burned him. "Did you see that?" The figure took a step forward. Buck raised his voice, his breath cracking. "Hey, stop!" His tone was too loud, too human, and in an instant the phantom was gone, leaving only the raw hush and the faint gleam of a rifle lying twisted in the scrub. They retrieved Morgan's rifle and moved faster, their boots thudding against the hardened earth. The pipeline road gave way to a narrow trail beside a dry arroyo, the walls rising steeply on either side. Somewhere upstream water whispered under stone, but it was buried too deep to hear. Here, the darkness pressed in. Buck fumbled with his radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger 1. We visual on." He cut off when Ramos pointed ahead. There, 200 yards down, a headlamp bobbed slowly. Someone was walking toward them, perfectly upright, pace steady. 4 pulses of light, 4 men, then a 5th, pale as bone, just behind them. Morgan swallowed hard. "We're 4 Rangers," he said. "Who the hell is that?" His voice was a rasp, like gravel in a throat. Buck switched his light off for a moment and listened. Nothing but the soft crunch of footsteps and the hollow sigh of wind in the rocks. When he flicked it back on, there was no one ahead, only 4 headlamps marching on. He counted again. 4. He looked over his shoulder. 4 prints in the dust. He turned around frantically. 4 pairs of eyes met his in the beams. "No one there." Chun jerked her head at the other side of the arroyo where the moonlight suddenly pooled. They watched, breathless, as a tall figure stepped out of the shadows, rifle in hand. A ranger, by the stance and uniform, but impossibly still and pale in the moonlight. It raised a hand in invitation, or a warning, and then it tilted its head as though listening for something they could not hear. Buck's stomach nodded. They decided to double back toward their vehicle, but as they turned, Ramos froze. "Where's Morgan?" he whispered. They spun to find Morgan gone, only 4 pairs of boots moving away along the trail. Buck cursed and raced back, heart pounding, the night air tasting of iron. He called Morgan's name. The wind swallowed it. He found only Morgan's radio, faceplate cracked, lying near a washout, finger still depressing the transmit button. Static hissed from it, a familiar voice at the edge of hearing. "It's following, always following." Buck's gasp echoed off the arroyo walls. He scooped up the radio and sprinted back toward the others, who stood clustered like frightened. "Dear, we need to go," he hissed. They fell in step, hurrying, pounding through the narrow corridor. The night morphed into shrieks and whispers just beyond the light, voices calling names that belonged only to them, dragging on the wind. They burst onto the pipeline road again and broke into a flat, open stretch toward their truck, headlights dim points in the distance. Buck dared to glance back. There, marching just behind them, was the phantom shoulder high to any man, tall and gaunt, face featureless but unmistakably human. It slowed when they slowed, paused when they paused, always exactly the same distance behind. He felt its gaze, cold and hungry, and something inside him snapped. Buck spun, rifle raised. "Who are you?" he screamed. In the sudden glare of his flashlight, the phantom's head lolled back, revealing a gaunt throat stitched with cracks of light, and then it rushed forward in a flicker, far too fast, gone as soon as it had been. The air trembled. The earth seemed to pulse. They reached the truck in a blur. Ramos fumbled the keys, shaking, and threw himself onto the seat. Buck slammed the door just as the phantom's handpail, impossibly long, clawed against the passenger window, leaving a smear of dust and bone white prints. Chun screamed and the engine roared to life. They peeled out onto the dark road, nipples of light receding in the rearview mirror. When they finally reached Persimmon Gap Station, dawn bleeding slow and orange across the sky, There were 3 haggard rangers stumbling from the vehicle. Morgan was gone. His rifle lay in the back seat, loose and heavy. They searched the bed of the truck, the gravel, the shoulder of the road, but there was no sign. No footprints, no blood, just the faint residue of fear under their nails. Dispatch. Logged 4 rangers out on patrol. 4 rangers safe, 1 still unaccounted for. They filed the report, bodies still trembling, eyes beating toward the mountains. Buck stared at the fading tire tracks and whispered, "We were 4 men tonight." Chun's voice shook, and yet 5 names on the roster. They never found Morgan. Sometimes, years later, hikers would call in to say they saw a lone figure. Walking the pipeline road at midnight, always keeping the same perfect distance behind whoever was in front, never closing the gap, yet never falling behind. I stood at the jagged mouth of the old Spanish fort just before midnight, the moon's pale beams slanting across the crumbling stone walls as a thin breeze carried the scent of mesquite and dust. My flashlight's beam carved a narrow tunnel of light through the darkness, revealing half-buried timbers and shattered flagstones like broken teeth. I'd come alone, on routine overnight patrol. Nothing more than a crack in the aged masonry had shown up on the geothermal scanner back at the ranger station, and I was eager to get back home before the wind whipped up into something fierce. The desert nights here could turn violent without warning. I keyed my mic and spoke into the radio. Raven 1 to station, I'm at the ruins of Fort San Oscuro. Nothing visible yet, over. Only static answered. I frowned, then tapped the control again. Station, do you copy? Raven 1, over. Silence. I heard my own voice crackle back through the speaker, tinny and distant, and my heart stuttered. Station never responded. There was only me out here, at the edge of nothing, calling into empty air. I shook off the chill creeping up my spine and moved deeper into the courtyard, boots crunching gravel. Shadows clung to the broken walls in impossible angles, as though the stones themselves were leaning in to watch me, and every footstep echoed. Against the darkness, my radio lay cold against my hip, a lifeline that refused to live. I slipped past an archway that had collapsed into a heap of rubble, the massive blocks ground smooth by time, and found myself before what must have been the commandant's quarters. A great slab of roof had pancaked down, half burying the doorway, and beyond it lay a hollow so silent I could hear my own blood pulsing in my ears. That's when I heard it, a distant crackle that could have been the scuff of shoes against stone, or the whisper of wind in the mesquite. My flashlight wavered and I blinked, convinced it was nothing, but then the radio spat to life in my hand. Raven 1. Do you copy? The voice was unmistakably mine. Weary, impatient, the same clipped cadence I'd used seconds ago. My gut roiled. I held the mic an inch from my lips, heart hammering. This is Raven 1, I managed. Station, did you send that? Over. The voice came back again, exactly mirroring my words. This is Raven 1. Station, did you send that? Over. But there was no station. The only other soul for miles was me. My breath caught and I dropped to one knee, the weight of the darkness pressing in. I glanced toward the zigzag line of ruined walls where starlight barely penetrated. Number. Flashlight beams, no voices, nothing but my own taunting echo. Desperation clawed at me. I forced myself to rise and stumbled back, kicking at a broken barrel that sent a hollow clang through the ruins. The radio sparked and sputtered and I flung it aside, watching the sparks scatter on the flagstones. In the moment of silence that followed, I realized the wind had died. The desert held its breath. My pulse pounded against my temples louder than any phantom. I reached for the radio again, intent on hurling it with all my might, but it gave one frantic burst of static. Then, my own voice again. Stop it. Whoever you are, Stop copying me." The words shattered the night. I backed away, stumbling over rubble, chest heaving, as though the fort itself were mocking me. My feet carried me toward the archway, toward the gaping hole that led back to the outer wall. I needed to be out of here, to get radio contact, to escape the walls that repeated my voice like a cruel trick of memory. I emerged into the open courtyard again, and the moon had drifted behind clouds, leaving me in near pitch black. I fumbled for my belt knife, steel glinting, comforting, and tested its edge. The world beyond the fort lay silent, the distant hum of an oil pump jack, the lone howl of a coyote. There was no other ranger coming. I screamed into the night, "Backup! I need backup!" My own voice returned, distant and hollow. "Backup! I need backup!" But no answer followed. My desperation soured into terror. I dashed toward where I parked my truck, the beam of my flashlight dancing across walls now alive with jittery shadows. Each time I called, my voice came back as if another me was trapped inside the stones, mimicking my fear. It felt like the very air was alive, feeding on my panic. I reached the truck and slammed the door, fumbling at the ignition. The radio crackled to life yet again. "I'm in the truck. Please come." My voice, pleading, broken, came back to me. I froze, key in hand, my breath ragged. I slammed the door shut and turned. There, just beyond the glow of my headlight, I saw a shape crouched at the edge of the ruins. The wind flickered the shadows across its face, and I realized it was me, my own reflection, stepping out from the darkness. I unholstered my flashlight and beamed it straight at the figure, but it dissolved into dust motes drifting away with the breeze. The radio in my hand leapt to life for one last time. Tonight. Calls from the ruins. It was me, whispering the words I'd never spoken, the ones I felt in the marrow of my bones, but had never dared to voice. I yanked open the door, gunned the engine, and peeled out across the desert floor, headlight beams cutting through the dark. As I sped away, I watched the fort shrink behind me, stones gleaming like teeth under the moon. I didn't look back. Again, but in the mirror I saw someone or something perched in the bed of the truck, gazing back at me with hollow eyes. I floored the pedal, hard hammering, and the radio exploded into a final static roar that sounded like laughter. All around me, the empty night answered. A thin ribbon of dust curled along the deserted service road as I turned off my headlights and stepped into the lantern glow of Campsite 12. The picnic table sat in precise alignments, their wood still warm from an evening blaze, and the fire pit crackled with dying embers that hissed like snakes curling into sleep. Yet the ground was undisturbed, no boot prints, no animal tracks. Not even the faint drag mark of a cooler or a forgotten water jug. A single folding chair lay tipped against a tree, its metal frame dented but perfectly balanced as though frozen in motion. The air smelled of char and pine resin, of wood smoke and damp earth, but no campers lingered to breathe it in. My heart thumped against the hollow quiet, and I realized how improbably still the forest had become, as though waiting for something impossible to begin or end. I crouched by the low stone ring and drew my hand across the smooth rocks, half expecting to find fresh fingerprints. A stray ember pulsed once, then dimmed. A breeze stirred the pines, but no leaf fell. I called out, voice muffled as if swallowed by blankets of moss draped over every branch, yet my words echoed nothing back. No response, no rustle of movement, just the faint hiss of the fire and the oppressive silence that closed in with each breath. I stood and walked the perimeter, passing empty hooks where food sacks had hung, peering beneath overturned boxes that must have held lantern oil. Nothing stirred, yet something hovered at the edge of sight, a shift in shadow, a brush of motion so slight I nearly dismissed it until my skin prickled with awareness. Curiosity drove me toward the creek, just beyond the palms of shadows cast by moonlit trees. The water's surface lay as smooth as glass, reflecting the pale Texas sky. But when I leaned to peer into its depths, I saw not my face but a shape behind me, tall and slender, draped in darkness. I spun. The bank was empty. Only the whisper of water running over stones answered me. My flashlight beam trembled as I swept it across the bank, revealing only mud churned by nothing at all. Footsteps fading away where none had begun. A distant laugh, soft as wind through hollow bone, drifted up the ravine, then faded so completely I wondered if I'd heard it at all. I retraced my steps to the campsite, palms slick with sweat, senses taut. The air had grown colder every breath, a frost that clung to my lungs. I heard the snap of a twig, but the forest remained still, as if holding its breath. A low hum vibrated through my teeth, maybe tinnitus or something worse. I forced myself forward, past the chairs and tables, toward where I'd parked my truck. But the road before me had cleaved into two impossibly straight lines through the underbrush, and I could no longer see the taillights I'd left glowing at dusk. I called my radio, but only static crackled back. Even the fire pit lay cold now, the stones black with ashen memory. Driven by an irrational hope, I stumbled into the tree line, following a compass heading that should have led me back. Underfoot, pine needles gave way to bare, compact soil raked smooth by myriad passes. I came upon a discarded backpack half buried in leaf litter, straps unbroken, zipper half open to reveal a single stick of gum and a frayed map. The marshmallow skewers still stood upright like silent sentinels, their sweet, gooey ends hardened into misshapen wads. The hair on the back of my neck rose as distant lights flickered between the trees' glow sticks, I told myself, left by campers too careless to gather their decorations. Then the lights winked out all at once. I spun to retrace my path, but the forest had shifted. Trees leaned at impossible angles, their bark twisted like screaming faces. The ground trembled beneath my boots, and from somewhere above a chorus of voices sang a lullaby I half recognized from childhood, pulling at memories I couldn't place. I screamed and ran, branches clawing at my jacket, heart pounding in my throat, racing through shadows that stretched and yawned like hungry mouths. I burst back into the clearing, only to find it empty, a blank circle of earth ringed by branches, but free of every sign I'd cataloged. There was no fire pit, no picnic tables, no embers glowing at my feet. My breath came in choking gasps as I realized I was utterly alone. I sank to my knees on the cold ground, the stars above spinning in a sky that felt too vast, too empty. And then I heard a soft scrape of wood on stone just behind me. I turned and saw faint footprints encircling me, dozens of them, leading inward toward my shaking form, but none leading away. I watched in horror as new prints appeared, each one smaller than a human foot, scoring the soil in perfect rings. A whisper curled across my ear, not more than a breath. Stay. I looked down and discovered my own footprints imprinting the earth in reverse, marking my approach rather than my escape. The moon dipped low, revealing shapes campers, their faces blurred by moonlight, standing just beyond reach, watching, waiting. And as they closed in, the forest sighed and drew me into the darkness, leaving only the empty campsite behind. I first saw them just after dusk, the way the dying light caught on something sharp and bright among the trees. I was headed home from Beaumont, headlights slicing through the thick, humid haze that always settles over this stretch of US 69, the kind of heat that clings to your skin like a second, grimy one, and the smell of wet earth mingled with the faint tang of river water drifting in from the neshes. I braked hard when that glint appeared at the side of the road, just beyond an old wire fence sagging under the weight of thyme and kudzu vines. My pulse jumped in my chest, bright metal flashing among the dark trunks of loblolly pines and mesquite. I should have felt foolish, half expecting to find a shattered headlight or a stray car emblem, but something in the way the light wavered like a heartbeat kept me frozen behind the wheel. Then I saw the first shard dot. It was small, no larger than my palm, a sliver of beveled glass hanging from a twisted limb by a rusted nail. The sharp edge caught my beam and fractured it into jagged slashes across the nearest tree's bark. I climbed out, boots sinking into soft loam, mosquitoes swarming the sweat sheen on my forehead. The air was eerily still. No cicadas, no whippoorwills. My heart hammered so loud I could almost hear it echo. I stepped closer. The shard reflected me, or so I thought, but instead of my own tired face pale under a dark baseball cap, it showed something else. A weeping woman, dress torn and soaked, kneeling on parched ground, mouth open in silent scream. I reeled back, stumbling onto the road. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I shone it again at the shard. Gone. The branch was bare, just rough wood, but when I blinked, there it was, hanging again. The same horrifying scene trapped inside. Something about the way the branch quivered made me glance up. Above me, dozens of mirror fragments dangled from the interwoven branches like 1,000 warped eyes. Each was a different shape: triangles, half-moons, twisted polygons, and every one caught the dying daylight and reflected it back in cruel, warped beams. For a moment, I felt surrounded, as if the forest had come alive with scornful stares. I swallowed, wet cotton in my mouth. My throat closed, but curiosity wrenched me forward. I grabbed one blade by its nail and slid it loose. The glass rattled against my palm, cold as a corpse's skin. I raised it to my own face. I expected my reflection haggard, stubble creeping across my jaw, but instead, a child's face stared back. The boy's eyes were vacant, drowned, and behind him a flooded farmhouse lay submerged beneath swollen river water. I could almost hear his laughter chopped into gurgling bubbles, his tiny arms reaching as if he could grasp salvation through the glass. I pitched the shard down, and it smashed into the dirt. For a heartbeat, I thought I heard the boy sob. Soft and sad, then nothing but the thwack of the fragment settling among leaves. The forest resumed its hush, but my skin crawled, prickles rising along my arms. I should have turned then and driven straight home, but something deeper held me in place, the kind of magnet pull you feel when you know stepping away might be safer, but leaving seems impossible. Deeper into the grove, the shards multiplied. I counted 40, 50, maybe more, each whispering impossible stories. One showed a dusty highway at midnight, headlights illuminating a mangled pickup, doors thrown open and no sign of driver or passenger. Another displayed a motel hallway lined with blood-spattered carpet, doors at the far end swinging open and shut, inviting you closer. My pulse pounded, breath coming in shallow gusts. The humidity felt like drowning. Sweat pooled under my collar, trickled between my shoulder blades. I brushed my fingers against the bark of a crooked oak. Its surface was etched with scratch marks, clawed lines gouged deep, as if something feral had tried to escape from within. One shard dangled within reach. I plucked it free, glass curved like a moonsicle. I brought it to my eye. There, in that fatal reflection, was me, frozen, lips pale, eyes wide, but behind me, standing in the dark, was something tall and gaunt, limbs too long, fingers sharpened like knives. It leaned forward, head tilted, as if curious about my reaction. When I jerked my head around, nothing was there but trees dripping with moss. My chest tightened. I dropped the mirror, watched it shatter in a spray of glittering shards that scattered into the undergrowth. The sound was like laughter, quick and cruel. I staggered backward, grass sliding beneath my boots, and nearly fell. That's when I saw her, at the far edge of the grove, framed by pines, A woman in white spectral ankle-length dress stained brown. Hair plastered to her cheeks by sweat or tears, I couldn't tell. She stood utterly still, gaze fixed on me. It felt like centuries passed before my mouth formed a question, but no sound came. She lifted a hand, pale as bone, and pointed to the forest floor. I looked down. Beneath my feet was a single mirror shard. The image in it flickered, a child with hollow eyes clutching my ankle, screaming. I jumped back, landing on the shattered glass, pain electrifying my foot. I yanked my boot off, blood blossoming across the insole, and watched in horror as the Fia. Shard sank into the mud, reflection distorted, half hidden beneath the dirt. The woman in white began to advance. Each step was slow, deliberate, and the trees around her bent, branches curling toward her like worshipping hands. She drifted closer, face unreadable, lips moving but no sound. My head pounded. I felt the air thicken, breath coming in ragged rasp. The sun dipped below the treetops. Twilight seeped in, and with it a hush that felt alive, like the world was holding its breath. I turned on my flashlight, beam carving a path through the gloom. For an instant the beam caught a branch full of shards, then fell on an open space and she was gone. My skin prickled. I ran, heedless of blood and pain, roots tangling my ankles, limbs trembling under panic. I burst through the trees into the sloping shoulder of the highway, headlights of a semi roaring past as I crossed the asphalt, slick with my boots' mud. I staggered to my car, yanked the door open. Inside, the air conditioner belched cold air, incongruous relief against the fever burning through me. I sat, gasping, chest heaving, vision swimming. The red digital clock glowed 8:17 p.m. I pressed my foot to the ground. Glass crunched beneath. I looked down. A shard, still gleaming, lay under my pedal. I froze, hand shaking as I reached for it. The mirror trembled in my fist, reflecting my desperate face. Then the beam of a passing car swept across the side. Mirror, and in its glint I saw them. Reflections of every horror I'd glimpsed in the grove. The drowning boy, the burning farmhouse, the hollow-eyed ranger, the woman in white crowded behind me in the back seat. I jerked around. The seat was empty. I hurled the shard through the open window. It shattered against the guardrail, pieces tinkling into darkness. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I started the car. My foot pressed the gas. Tires screeching as I peeled away, engine roaring in revolt. I didn't look back, though I was sure in that drifting cloud of dust the trees had parted behind me, and I could see dozens of shards catching the headlights and flashing like 1,000 haunted eyes. I drove straight to my cabin on the edge of Eagle Lake, wounds bleeding, breath ragged. I shouldn't have stopped. I should have left the grove alone. But even now, weeks later, I see those reflections when I close my eyes. And sometimes at night, when the wind blows just right through the pines, I hear the soft chime of glass, swinging in the darkness, and I know I'll never truly escape those mirrors in the trees. I couldn't tell you exactly when the line appeared. One moment we were breaking camp under the ancient oaks. The next I half blinked, and there it was, etched into the earth at the very fringe of the park. A shallow trench of pale, chalk white. Soil, as if someone had drawn a survey mark just after a rain, cutting through the grass and wildflowers in a precise, unyielding slash. We'd grown up hearing tales of that old survey line, how it had once marked a boundary between feuding ranchers back when the land was lawless, how the Mescalero Apaches whispered that crossing it summoned a darkness that belonged to neither. Sighed. I'd always laughed at it until that morning, when the sun had just crested the limestone bluffs and thrown long, golden slivers across the dusty road. I stepped over the line to fetch water from the creek, and in that instant something hitch-knifed into awareness behind my eyes, a faint click of a lock turning in the dark. When I looked back at my fellow rangers, their heads popped up in unison like those animatronic bears on old prairie rides. And I swear I heard the faint scent of decay, like damp wool in a tomb, drift on the breeze even though we'd just been breathing dry, cold air. I blinked twice, and the world snapped into focus, and then their eyes caught mine, empty pits of absolute blackness. So glossy they reflected the rising sun like pools of oil. I dropped the pail, and the echo of metal on stone rang out too loud in that still morning. Ranger Gonzalez froze, mid-stretch, his coffee mug poised at his lips, and the liquid held its curve like a snapshot of time. His eyes impossible, infinite, locked on mine. A chill spiraled down my spine as I realized none of them were blinking. Not even once. I jerked forward, heart thudding in a rhythm I'd only heard once before, running barefoot through switchgrass down by spring rain. And I heard them stand as one, sliding into positions they'd practiced 1,000 times, but never like this. Their arms bent, hands clenching at their sides, faces wide enough to mirror my own terror, windows into a void. "Tom?" Someone said, only it wasn't Lieutenant Myers in his flat, deliberate tone. It sounded hollow, like gauze over a speaker. The darkness behind their eyes seemed to pulse with an echo of something alien, as if more than one creature dwelled in that black well. My boots scraped gravel as I backed up over the line, stumbling back into camp. Their movement was synchronized, an uncanny ballet 2 steps forward whenever I took one back, never crossing that jagged chalk scar, as though the line was a wall too real to ignore. I yanked my radio pack off and hit the call button, fingers trembling so badly I thought I might drop the thing. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Jones. We've got a code 5 possible contamination. I need a vac." My voice cracked and sputtered into static. The crackle of familiar radio chatter turned into a laugh, a rasping crescendo that wound itself into every nerve. "Why-oh," it hissed. Then it cut out, swallowed whole by that silent nothing beyond the line. My pulse soared. I knew those eyes. I'd seen them once before after the storms in '97 near Devil's Creek, when lightning split the canyon walls and left black scorch marks like sinister art on sandstone. Survivors spoke of shadows that clung to them afterward, claims none of us believed until now. I heard boots crunch at the edge of the trench behind me and spun, ready to shove someone back. But it was Deputy Calhoun, only inches away, his pulse point pulsing at his throat, visible, red, alive, yet his eyes were too dark. So dark they swallowed the white of his sclera. I braced my forearms on my knees, trying to make sense of the impossible. Every bit of me screamed to run, but I could barely move. Their steps were soft on the grass, a steady advance that filled the world of birdsong and rustling leaves with its ominous hush. Behind them, scrub oaks swayed in the early breeze as if nudging each other to look away. "Don't cross," someone whispered behind me, someone with my voice. I whipped around, heart hammering, and saw myself standing there, shirt dusted with dew, face taut with the same rising panic. My doppelganger smiled, but it was a stretch of lips too wide, lips that revealed teeth too white, too perfect, too hungry. The lieutenant's shadow detached from the dark line and slid toward me. His form was too tall, too stretched, like a charcoal sketch pressed against moving water. He raised a hand, and as his fingers curved, I felt 1,000 cold arms wrap around my ribs, as though gravity and flesh and bone were conspired to pull me under. Behind me, the wind kicked up and carried a chorus of voices. My voice? His voice? Their voices all calling, coaxing, echoing off the distant canyon walls. They begged me to step forward, to join them, to feel the dark hush that filled every unblinking eye. I could almost believe it would be mercy, a release from the panic. Clawing in my chest, something inside me broke free, a primal roar I didn't know I possessed. I spun on my heel and sprinted away, boots digging into the coarse soil, branches whipping my arms until I burst through the trees and onto the service road. My lungs burned, but I didn't slow until I hit the ranger station, slamming through the door and flicking the lights. They flickered once, twice, and I screamed. Every flashlight, every computer screen, every security camera glowed with black lenses, watching me. Even the mounted map of the park, backlit with a pale amber, had 2 pinpricks of darkness where the lens for the CCTV feed should have been. I backed into the filing cabinet, eyes darting for the radio. My reflection shimmered on the glass face of the console like a cruel mirage. My pupils were too large, smothered in shadow. I reached up, finger trembling, and touched the center of my eyeball. Ice bloomed across my vision, and I heard that rasping laugh again, closer inside my head. The door to the station clicked shut. Footsteps padded across the linoleum floor. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the light, and I felt cold breath, unfamiliar, rancid, hover at my neck. "Welcome back," someone said with my voice, a whisper that crawled into my ear and settled like ash. I realized in that moment that the line was everywhere now, in the walls, in the lights, in every shadow, and there was nothing left beyond it but endless black eyes.